They say you should never burn bridges with family. But what do you do when your family is planning to burn you first? I'm Caroline Mitchell. At 36, I'm the CEO of my family's manufacturing company, a position I earned through 15 years of blood, sweat, and relentless nights at the office, while my golden child sister posted selfies and lived off our parents' money. 3 weeks before her $500,000 wedding, I made a terrible mistake. I came back to drop off a check and overheard them in my father's study. My parents, my sister, all three of them laughing as they plotted my destruction. "We announce her resignation at the reception," my father said, "in front of 200 witnesses. She won't dare fight back." "Then we vote in Vanessa as CEO," my mother added. "It'll be over before she realizes what happened." My sister, wearing her wedding dress for a fitting, giggled. "I can't wait to see her face." I should have confronted them. I should have screamed, cried, demanded answers. Instead, I did something they never expected. I smiled. I went home. And I started building their destruction piece by piece. Because here's what they didn't know: my grandfather left me more than just shares in his company. He left me weapons, and I was about to use every single one. What happened next at that wedding? Let's just say it's a story about betrayal, justice, and what happens when the underestimated daughter finally stops playing nice. Stick around, because this gets so much better and so much worse than you can possibly imagine. My name is Caroline Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and I'm the CEO of Mitchell & Associates, a manufacturing company my grandfather founded 73 years ago. If you'd told me 3 months ago that my own family would try to destroy everything I'd built, I would have laughed. But I'm not laughing anymore. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I stood at the head of our main conference table facing 12 board members presenting our third quarter projections. The numbers were good, exceptional actually. Revenue had hit $200 million for the first time in company history. Our 800 employees had the highest job satisfaction scores in the industry. 3 major clients had just renewed contracts that would carry us through the next 5 years. The manufacturing sector is contracting nationwide, I said, clicking to the next slide. But we've grown by 18%. Our strategic pivot to sustainable materials has positioned us exactly where the market is heading. Richard Crawford, our longest-serving board member and my grandfather's best friend, nodded with approval. Marcus Chen, usually my toughest critic, was taking notes. Even my father, seated at the far end of the table, couldn't find anything to criticize. Not openly, anyway. After the meeting, Richard pulled me aside in the hallway. "Your grandfather would be damn proud, Caroline. This company is in the best hands it's ever been in." His words should have made me feel secure. They didn't. Because I'd learned a long time ago that success in business didn't translate to value in my family. That Sunday, I drove to my parents' estate in Connecticut for our monthly family brunch. The house stood at the end of a tree-lined drive, white columns, wrap-around porch, the kind of place that screamed old money even though my grandfather had been the son of a factory worker. He'd built his wealth. My parents had simply inherited it and learned to perform it. I parked next to a silver Mercedes I didn't recognize, probably another gift for Vanessa, and walked through the front door. No one greeted me. I followed the sound of laughter to the sunroom where my family was already gathered around the table, mimosas in hand. "Caroline!" My mother. Patricia glanced up from her phone just long enough to offer a thin smile. "You're late." I checked my watch. "It's 11. You said 11. "We started at 10:30, my sister Vanessa chirped from across the table, not looking up from her own phone. She was photographing her breakfast, some elaborate spread of pastries and fruit, probably for Instagram. "Mom texted everyone." I pulled out my phone. No text. This wasn't new. My father Robert sat at the head of the table in his weekend uniform, expensive polo shirt, khakis, the Wall Street Journal folded beside his plate. He acknowledged my arrival with the briefest of nods before returning to his reading. Vanessa, meanwhile, had stood up to greet someone, but not me. My mother had risen too, arms extended, face bright with genuine warmth. "There's my girl." Patricia embraced Vanessa like she'd been away for months instead of living 40 minutes away in Manhattan. "Let me see the ring again. I still can't believe how perfect it is." Vanessa extended her left hand where a 3-carat diamond caught the morning light. "Bradley has such good taste. He designed it himself." She hadn't designed anything herself in her entire life, but she'd certainly mastered the art of accepting other people's efforts as tribute. I moved to the sideboard to fix myself a plate, listening to them gush about wedding plans, about the Plaza Hotel's crystal ballroom, about the designer who was flying in from Paris to do a final fitting. $500,000 for a wedding. I'd paid for my own college education with 3 jobs and student loans I'd only finished paying off 2 years ago. Vanessa's college before she dropped out junior year to find herself had been entirely funded by our parents. The memories came without invitation, as they always did. I was 7 years old watching Vanessa, just 3, toddle across the living room. Our mother scooped her up, covering her face with kisses, calling her our little princess, our perfect angel. I stood in the doorway with a report card, straight A's, teachers' comments raving about my work, and waited for someone to notice. No one did. I was 12 building sets for the school play, while Vanessa 8 played the lead. On opening night, our parents arrived with flowers and an enormous bouquet of roses. For Vanessa. I'd spent 6 weeks designing and painting a 2-story Victorian house facade. My art teacher called it remarkably sophisticated for a middle schooler. My parents never saw it. They left right after Vanessa's curtain call. I was 18, standing in a high school gymnasium with 29 other people at my graduation party. Vanessa's party 4 years later filled a country club ballroom with 200 guests. Same parents, same budget, different daughter. "Caroline, sit down, you're hovering," my mother said, pulling me back to the present. I took the empty chair at the far end of the table, my usual spot, as far from the center of attention as possible. "How's work?" my father asked, not looking up from his paper. "Good. We closed the Hartwell contract, $42 million over 3 years. That was all. Vanessa, however, brightened. "That's amazing. You know what's also amazing? Bradley just got promoted to senior associate. They're giving him a corner office." She pulled out her phone to show pictures of an office that looked identical to every other investment banking office in Manhattan. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother cooed. "You must be so proud." Bradley Beaumont III was a mediocre investment banker whose primary qualification was being the son of Bradley Beaumont Jr., who had connections to half of Wall Street and a third of Washington. But Vanessa was marrying him in 3 weeks, and our parents were treating it like a merger between royal houses. As brunch continued, I sat quietly eating my eggs, watching my family perform their usual roles. Vanessa held court, describing her honeymoon plans, 2 weeks in the Maldives, first-class flights, and overwater villa that cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. My parents hung on every word. I was window dressing necessary for the illusion of a complete family, but not actually part of the performance. After an hour, I made my excuses work to catch up on emails to send. No one protested. Vanessa barely looked up. My mother kissed the air near my cheek. My father nodded. As I drove back to Manhattan, my hands tight on the wheel, I told myself what I'd been telling myself for 36 years. It didn't matter. I didn't need their approval. I had built something real, something meaningful. I was CEO of a company that mattered, that employed hundreds of people, that my grandfather had trusted me to lead. I thought being CEO meant I was finally safe. I was wrong. The truth is, I'd been climbing alone my entire life. I was 21 when I walked into Mitchell & Associates for my first day of work, fresh out of business school, with a degree I'd earned through scholarship money and night shifts waiting tables. My grandfather met me at the door that morning, his hand firm on my shoulder. "You'll start in financial analysis," he told me. "Bottom floor shared desk, same salary as everyone else starting out. If you want to lead this company someday, you'll need to understand it from the ground up." I didn't ask for special treatment. I never had. The other analysts were skeptical at first. The founder's granddaughter working alongside them, eating lunch from the same vending machines, staying late to meet the same deadlines. They waited for me to quit to complain to demand the corner office I hadn't earned. I never did. Instead, I worked harder than anyone else in that department. I learned every aspect of our supply chain, memorized our vendor contracts, could recite our inventory costs by heart. When the senior analyst quit 6 months in, I absorbed his workload without asking for a raise. My grandfather noticed. My parents didn't. By 25, I was operations manager overseeing the factory floor where my grandfather had started his company. I spent my days in steel-toed boots and a hard hat learning how every piece of equipment worked, listening to the workers who'd been there for decades, understanding the rhythm of production that made everything else possible. The men and women on that floor taught me more about business than any classroom ever had. They also taught me something else. Respect is earned through competence, not inherited through blood. At 28, I became Vice President of Strategic Development. It was 2015 and the economy was collapsing around us. Manufacturing companies were dropping like flies. Our competitors were filing for bankruptcy protection or selling off assets to stay afloat. Our board was panicking, talking about layoffs, about closing facilities, about survival mode. I spent 3 months analyzing every line item in our budget, every contract, every supplier relationship. Then I walked into a board meeting with a restructuring plan that would cut our costs by 30% while maintaining product quality and keeping every employee on payroll. "You want us to renegotiate contracts with vendors who've worked with us for decades," my father challenged. "You want to retool our entire production process. That's incredibly risky, Caroline." "What's risky is doing nothing," I replied. "We can make these changes now on our terms, or we can wait 6 months and make them desperately when we have no leverage and no options." The board voted to implement my plan. It worked. We didn't just survive the recession, we emerged stronger. While our competitors were struggling to rebuild, we were positioned to capture market share. By 2016, our revenue had grown 23%. My grandfather squeezed my hand at that year's Christmas dinner and said, "You saved us." My father said nothing. When my grandfather's health began failing, the question of succession became urgent. He was 87, still mentally sharp, but physically frail. The board started interviewing external candidates, experienced CEOs from larger firms, people with impressive resumes and connections. I didn't ask my grandfather to advocate for me. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I worked. I developed a 10-year growth plan that mapped out every aspect of the company's future market expansion: technology, integration, sustainable manufacturing practices, employee development programs. I presented it to the board over the course of 3 hours, answering every question, addressing every concern, demonstrating not just where I wanted to take the company, but exactly how we'd get there. The vote was unanimous. Well, almost unanimous. 11 board members voted yes. 1 voted no. My father, the board chairman, sat at the head of the table with his arms crossed and said, "I abstain from this vote." In corporate terms, an abstention is a no. Everyone in that room understood what he was really saying. His own daughter wasn't good enough. I became CEO anyway. I was 33 years old, and I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted. The personal cost of that climb was something I rarely let myself think about. I'd never been married, never had children. My last serious relationship ended 4 years ago when James, a lawyer I'd been dating for 2 years, sat me down at dinner and said, "I love you, but I can't compete with your job. If we're going to build a life together, you need to scale back, work less, make time for us." I looked at him across the table and realized he was asking me to choose between my career and his comfort. I chose my career. He left 3 days later. I had 3 close friends from college, women I'd once talked to every day. Now I saw them maybe twice a year, squeezing in lunch between meetings, apologizing when I had to cancel because of some crisis at work. They'd stopped inviting me to things. I couldn't blame them. I'd missed Rachel's baby shower, Lisa's birthday party, and Jennifer's wedding. I was in Singapore negotiating a merger when she got married, and even though I'd sent an expensive gift, we both knew it wasn't the same as showing up. My apartment in Manhattan was beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, a kitchen I never cooked in. It was also empty. I slept there maybe 5 hours a night, woke before dawn, and was at my desk by 6:30 every morning. Weekends were spent in the office. Holidays were spent reviewing financial reports. My cleaning service kept the place spotless because I was never there long enough to make a mess. It wasn't a home. It was a place to sleep between battles. Last Christmas, I'd made the mistake of mentioning at dinner that we'd just secured a $20 million contract with a Fortune 500 client. It was a major win, the kind of deal that would stabilize our revenue for years. My father barely looked up from his wine. "Well, the economy is performing well," he said dismissively. "Anyone could have landed that contract in this market." My mother immediately pivoted. "Vanessa, darling, tell everyone about your new partnership with that skincare company." Vanessa lit up. "Oh, it's so exciting. They're sending me their entire product line for free, and I just have to post about it on Instagram. It's basically a partnership." Everyone congratulated her. No one mentioned my $20 million contract again. When I told them I was being named CEO, my sister had laughed, not cruelly, just genuinely amused. "CEO of a small company, isn't that impressive, Caroline? I mean, Elon Musk is a CEO. So is the guy who runs Apple." My father had added, "Your grandfather built that company. You're just maintaining what he created." Just maintaining it. Never mind that I'd grown revenue by 40%. Never mind that I'd saved 800 jobs. Never mind that industry publications were calling me one of the most innovative leaders in manufacturing. To my family, I would always be the daughter who tried too hard and still fell short. But behind their smiles, a storm was brewing. 6 months ago, Vanessa announced her engagement at one of our monthly family dinners, and I watched my parents transform the moment into something that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with spectacle. "Bradley proposed last night at Per Se," Vanessa gushed, extending her left hand so the 3-carat diamond could catch the chandelier light. "He had them hide the ring in a champagne flute. Can you believe it? It was so romantic." My mother actually squealed. My father stood to shake an invisible Bradley's hand as if the man were present to receive his approval. I offered my congratulations from across the table, and Vanessa glanced at me just long enough to say, "Thanks," before turning back to our parents. "We're thinking the Plaza Hotel," she continued. "The Crystal Ballroom. It's where Kennedy's grandchildren got married, where celebrities have their weddings. It's absolutely perfect." My father nodded approvingly. "Nothing but the best for our girl." The budget came up over dessert. $500,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. $500,000 for a single day. My mother was already on her phone scrolling through wedding planners, reading reviews aloud. My father was calculating how many of his business associates could be invited, how this wedding could serve as a networking opportunity, a display of the Mitchell family's continued prominence. "Caroline," my mother said, almost as an afterthought, "we'd like you to contribute to the wedding fund. How does 100,000 sound?" I set down my coffee cup carefully. My parents had a net worth somewhere in the 8-figure range. They owned the Connecticut estate, outright had investment properties, and collected dividends from stock portfolios my grandfather had established. They didn't need my money. But I knew what this was, a test, a tithe proof of my allegiance to the family hierarchy. "Of course," I said. "I'll write you a check." Vanessa pulled out her phone and showed me her Pinterest board. 847 pins. Flower arrangements that cost more than most people's cars. Ice sculptures. A cake with actual gold leaf. A dress by a designer whose name I recognized from fashion magazines I'd never had time to read. Over the following weeks, the wedding consumed every family interaction. My mother interviewed 7 different wedding planners before selecting one who'd coordinated events for 2 senators and a tech billionaire. Vanessa scheduled dress fittings, cake tastings, floral consultations. The guest list swelled to 200 people, carefully curated to include the city's most influential figures, politicians, business leaders, society columnists who could ensure the wedding received proper coverage. I was never invited to these planning sessions. When I asked if I could help, my mother waved me off. "Oh, sweetheart, you're so busy with work. We don't want to burden you. Besides, Vanessa has very specific tastes." The subtext was clear. My input wasn't needed or wanted. I was being asked to pay for a wedding I wasn't allowed to help plan. The engagement party happened on a Saturday evening in early spring, held at a waterfront venue in Greenwich. 150 guests, most of whom I didn't know. The event cost $75,000, which I knew, because I'd overheard my mother on the phone with the caterer bragging about the budget. I arrived alone, wearing a navy dress I'd bought 3 years ago for a different corporate event, and immediately felt underdressed. Vanessa wore custom marquesa, looking every bit the princess bride my parents had always wanted her to be. I found my place at a table near the back, far from the family table where my parents sat with Vanessa Bradley and his parents. I recognized several faces in the crowd, board members from Mitchell and Associates, colleagues of my father's society figures, whose names appeared regularly in the Connecticut social pages. Richard Crawford caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, sympathetic nod. Midway through dinner, my father stood to give a speech. He tapped his champagne glass and the room fell silent. For 15 minutes he spoke about Vanessa. He described her grace, her charm, her natural ability to connect with people. He talked about her Instagram following as if it were a Fortune 500 company. He praised Bradley's family connections, calling the union a perfect match of tradition and influence. Then he said the line that made my chest tighten. He looked directly at me as he spoke. "Vanessa represents the future of this family. She has grace, charm, and the connections that build empires. She is our legacy." The room erupted in applause. I stood in the corner holding my champagne glass so tightly I worried it might shatter. I was the CEO of the family company. I'd grown our revenue by 40%. I employed 800 people. But according to my father standing before 200 guests, Vanessa was the legacy, not me. I noticed Richard Crawford wasn't clapping. Neither was Helen Jang, another longtime board member. They exchanged a glance across the room that I couldn't quite read. Concern maybe, or disapproval. Several other people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, their applause perfunctory. After the speech, I moved through the party like a ghost. People congratulated Vanessa. People told my parents how lucky they were. No one approached me except to ask, "How's work?" As if work were the only thing I could possibly have to talk about. At 9 o'clock, I slipped out early, citing an early morning meeting. No one noticed me leave, but I was noticing things, small things that didn't quite add up. Over the next few weeks, I overheard fragments of conversations at family gatherings that felt oddly weighted. My father on the phone in his study door, slightly ajar. "The wedding isn't just about Vanessa, it's about setting the future in stone." My mother speaking to someone I couldn't see. "Everyone who matters will be there. It's the perfect opportunity." At Sunday brunch, my father mentioned to a family friend, "We're planning something special for the reception, the right moment to announce some family business." My instincts, the same ones that had told me when to restructure our supply chain, when to push for aggressive expansion, when to recognize an opportunity or a threat, were screaming at me now. Something was coming. Something bigger than a wedding, more calculated than a celebration. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it building, could sense the pieces moving into position on a board I hadn't realized I was playing on. That wedding wasn't about vows. It was about war. 4 months before the wedding, my mother called with a request that seemed innocent enough. "Caroline, darling, we need some photos of your grandfather for the wedding slideshow. You know, the sentimental family montage. Could you go through his things in the attic? I'd do it myself, but my back has been terrible lately." I should have known better. My mother's back was fine. She played tennis 3 times a week. But I agreed because it gave me an excuse to spend a Saturday at the estate alone, away from the wedding hysteria that had consumed every family gathering. The attic was exactly as I remembered from childhood, dusty, hot smelling of old wood and mothballs. Boxes were stacked along the walls, labeled in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Holiday decorations, old clothes, tax records from the 1980s. I found the box I was looking for in the far corner, pushed back behind a rack of my mother's old fur coats. A leather box worn at the edges with a brass plate that read James Mitchell, Personal Documents. I carried it to a clear space near the small octagonal window and sat cross-legged on the floor. Inside were the fragments of my grandfather's life. Black and white photos from the Korean War, his face young and serious in uniform. His Purple Heart still in its original case. The original incorporation papers for Mitchell and Associates dated 1952. His signature bold across the bottom. Birth certificates, marriage license, newspaper clippings about the company's early successes. And then 2 manila envelopes. The first was labeled in typed letters, Last Will and Testament, filed 2010. I'd seen this will before years ago, after the estate was settled. The second envelope was underneath slightly yellowed, the label handwritten in my grandfather's shakier late-life script, Original Will, 2009. My hands were trembling as I opened the second envelope first. The document inside was dated January 2009, 14 months before my grandfather died. I scanned the legal language until I reached the distribution of assets. Company shares, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, all itemized with precision. And then the beneficiaries, to be divided equally between my granddaughters Caroline Mitchell and Vanessa Mitchell, each receiving 50% of the estate valued at approximately $15 million each. I opened the filed will with a sense of dread I couldn't quite name. This one was dated February 2010, 1 month before he died. The distribution was different. Vanessa 80%, Caroline 20%. I sat there on the attic floor holding both documents, trying to understand. My grandfather had changed his will in the final month of his life when he was already weak, already dying. Why, the man who had hired me at 21, who had insisted I start at the bottom and earn every promotion, who had told me I had his discipline and integrity, why would he leave me scraps while giving everything to Vanessa? Unless he hadn't. I dug deeper into the box, pushing aside photos and letters. At the bottom, wrapped in a soft cloth, I found an old cassette tape. The label was written in the same shaky handwriting as the second envelope. For my eldest, play alone. It took me 20 minutes to find a cassette player. I finally located one in a box of old electronics from the 1990s, praying the batteries still worked. I sat back down, inserted the tape, and pressed play. Static, then breathing, then my grandfather's voice, so much weaker than I remembered, but unmistakably his. Caroline, my dear girl, if you're hearing this, it means they succeeded. I pressed the tape player against my chest, my eyes already burning. I'm recording this in November 2009. Your parents visit me every day now, pressuring me. They bring lawyers, documents, papers to sign. They say you don't need the money, that you're strong, that you'll be successful on your own. They say Vanessa needs protection, needs security. She's not like you, they tell me. She'll never be able to take care of herself. His breathing was labored, pausing between sentences. I'm old, Caroline. I'm tired. And I'm sick. The doctors say my mind is going. Early Alzheimer's, they call it. Some days I'm clear. Some days I can't remember what I had for breakfast. Your parents know this. They're using it against me. They bring documents when I'm confused, when I'm tired, when I can barely hold a pen. They tell me it's for the best that I'm protecting both my granddaughters this way. I could hear him shift the rustle of paper near the microphone. I tried to fight them. I called my attorney Harold, but they convinced me he was too old, that I needed someone new. The new lawyer works for them, I think. I tried to tell the doctor what was happening, but who believes an old man with dementia? I don't have much time left. I can feel myself slipping away day by day. His voice cracked. So I'm leaving you this. The truth. I see you, Caroline. I've always seen you. You are the one who has my discipline, my integrity, my drive. The company is yours by right, not by inheritance. Whatever happens to my will, whatever documents they make me sign, know that I tried to stop them. Know that I love you. I've left you something. They can't take the truth and the tools to fight back when you're ready." The tape clicked off. I sat in the silent attic, tears streaming down my face, holding this 40-year-old cassette player like it was the most precious thing I'd ever owned. I searched through the box again with new urgency. There, tucked into a small velvet pouch, was a key with a paper tag attached. First National Bank, Safety Deposit Box 247. I held it up to the light streaming through the window, wondering what else my grandfather had hidden away, what other tools he'd left me. I noticed something else, too. The box's interior had a velvet lining that seemed thicker than it should be, slightly raised in one corner. I pressed on it experimentally, feeling something solid underneath, but I was too overwhelmed, too emotionally raw to investigate further. I'd come back to this later. For now, I had questions. Over the next week, I made careful inquiries. I invited Richard Crawford to lunch at his favorite steakhouse, ostensibly to discuss quarterly projections. Midway through our meal, I asked casually, "Did you notice anything unusual about my grandfather's final years? Any decisions that seemed out of character?" Richard set down his fork, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Your parents made some unusual decisions after James passed, moved money around, restructured some things. At the time, we assumed they were following his wishes." He paused. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about company history," I said, keeping my voice light. I had coffee with Helen Jong 3 days later. When I asked similar questions, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. "We've noticed some expenditures that don't seem quite right. Nothing illegal necessarily, but questionable. Your father has been very creative with corporate funds." Neither of them pushed further. But I saw the concern in their eyes, the unspoken question, what had I found? And then I heard his voice again, the only person who ever loved me speaking from beyond the grave. 3 weeks after finding my grandfather's recording, I was still processing what it meant, still trying to decide what to do with the truth I'd uncovered. Then everything changed on a Tuesday night that started with flowers and ended with the death of whatever illusions I'd been clinging to. My mother had called that afternoon. "Caroline, I hate to bother you, but could you drop off the check for the florist, $25,000? They need it by tonight or they'll cancel our order, and Vanessa has her heart set on those imported French roses." $25,000 for flowers. I wrote the check during a conference call, barely thinking about it. Another tithe, another payment into the system that had never valued me. I left the office at 10:15, driving through light traffic to Connecticut, expecting to drop the envelope through the mail slot and head home. But when I turned into the long driveway at 10:47, the house wasn't dark. Lights blazed from my father's study, the room where he conducted all his important business, where family decisions were made behind closed doors. I parked near the side entrance, the one I'd used since childhood, and let myself in with my key. I was family, after all. I had access. The hallway was dark, but I could see the strip of light under my father's study door. I walked toward it, envelope in hand, planning to knock and hand over the check. Then I heard my father's voice sharp and clear through the heavy wood. "Are we certain she doesn't suspect anything?" I froze 3 feet from the door, my hand still extended. My mother's voice answered, that particular tone she used when discussing me, the one that mixed pity with contempt. "She's clueless, just like always buried in her spreadsheets and quarterly reports. She has no idea what's coming." Then a third voice. "Vanessa." My sister giggling like this was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "She actually thinks she's family. Can you imagine, after all these years, she still doesn't get it?" They laughed. All 3 of them laughing at me in the dark while I stood in the hallway, barely breathing, the check for $25,000 still clutched in my hand. My father's voice turned businesslike. "The wedding is perfect cover. We'll have 200 witnesses, industry leaders, shareholders, members of the press. We announce her voluntary resignation during the reception right after dinner. Say she's stepping down to focus on her personal life, find balance, maybe start a family. She won't dare make a scene in front of everyone. She'll smile and take it like she always does. And then, that was my mother, eager, excited. Then the emergency board meeting we've already arranged. Bradley's father has secured 3 proxy votes from his connections. Combined with our shares, Vanessa will have the majority needed to be voted in as CEO. It'll all be over in one evening. Vanessa's voice uncertain for the first time. But what about the people who like her? Richard Crawford, Helen Zhang. Some of the others. My father scoffed. We have the video ready. Marcus helped us edit together footage from company events, her at the holiday party with a drink in her hand, looking tired at meetings, walking out of the office carrying boxes. It'll look like she's unstable drinking, checking out. We've paid 3 former employees to express concerns about her leadership, her mental state. By the time we're done, the board will think they're saving the company by removing her. And the media, my mother asked. Already handled. We've leaked the story to Business Insider. It'll run the morning after the wedding. Troubled CEO steps down amid family concerns. We'll look compassionate like we're helping her. She'll look like she's having a breakdown. They discussed more details. The timing 3:15 p.m. after the main course, but before cake, when guests would be relaxed and receptive. The prepared remarks my father would deliver. The video presentation queued up on the ballroom screens. The proxy votes already secured. The narrative already crafted. Every detail planned, every contingency covered. 3 months of preparation to destroy me in front of 200 people at my sister's wedding. I didn't burst through the door. I didn't scream or cry or demand an explanation. Something in me had gone very still, very cold. I backed away from the study door, one careful step at a time, my shoes silent on the marble floor. I walked back through the dark hallway, out the side entrance to my car. I placed the envelope with the check on the driver's seat beside me. The drive back to Manhattan took 43 minutes. I didn't speed. I didn't cry. I didn't turn on the radio. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing even. I felt like I was watching myself from a distance, observing this woman who was driving through the night after learning her family had been plotting her professional execution. I parked in my building's garage at 11:58 p.m., rode the elevator to the 14th floor, unlocked my apartment door, and walked to the kitchen where I poured a glass of red wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. I carried the wine to my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I encrypted it with a password only I would know, then titled it Project Phoenix. Because that's what this was. A death and a rebirth. The end of the daughter who'd spent 36 years begging for scraps of approval, and the beginning of something else. Something harder. Something that would fight back. I opened a blank document and began typing. Everything I knew, everything I'd learned, the 2 wills, the cassette tape, my grandfather's voice describing their manipulation, the key to the safety deposit box, Richard and Helen's concerns about questionable expenditures, and now this, their complete plan to humiliate and remove me. I worked until 4 in the morning, documenting everything, beginning to formulate a strategy. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, and I barely recognized the woman I saw there. Her eyes were cold. Not hurt anymore. Not sad. Not desperate for love she'd never receive. Just cold. Calculating. Ready. They'd spent 3 months planning my destruction. They'd spent my entire lifetime training me to be competitive, ruthless, strategic. They'd taught me to see every angle, anticipate every move, never show weakness. They'd made me into exactly the opponent they should have feared most. They'd forgotten one crucial thing I learned from the best. My grandfather hadn't just left me a company. He'd left me his spine, his integrity, his refusal to back down from a fight. Tomorrow, I would begin building their destruction. Tonight, I allowed myself one last moment of grief, for the family that had never existed, for the parents who'd never loved me, for the sister who'd never seen me as anything but competition. Then I closed that grief away in a box I would never open again. They thought I'd crumble, but they didn't know who I'd become. The next morning, I woke at 6 a.m. after 2 hours of sleep, showered, dressed, and picked up my phone. I opened the family group chat and typed, "Can't wait for the big day. Let me know if you need anything else." I added a smiley emoji, something I never did, and hit send. My mother's response came within minutes. "So sweet of you, darling. Could you make Vanessa's hair appointment on Thursday? She's swamped." "Of course," I typed back. "Happy to help." And just like that, the performance began. That Saturday, I attended a bridesmaid's dress fitting at a boutique in Soho that charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. Vanessa had chosen periwinkle blue, a color that washed me out completely, but looked stunning on her. I stood on the platform while the seamstress pinned the hem, and when Vanessa asked, "Do you like it?" I smiled warmly and said, "It's perfect. You have such an eye for this." She preened, taking a selfie in her own gown. "I'm thinking of using Garrett for the photography. He did the Vanderbilt wedding last year." "That's a great choice," I said, even though I had no idea who Garrett was. "You might also consider Elena Chen. She did that feature in Vogue last month. Very editorial." Vanessa's eyes lit up. "Oh my God, yes, I love her work. I'll call her today." My mother, watching from a velvet settee, caught my eye and nodded approvingly. Good daughter, helpful daughter, non-threatening daughter. Sunday brunch became my stage. I arrived exactly on time, brought pastries from Vanessa's favorite bakery, and asked all the right questions. "Have you finalized the honeymoon plans?" Vanessa launched into a 20-minute description of their $40,000 trip to the Maldives Overwater Villa private butler couple's spa treatments. Our parents were paying for all of it naturally. I listened with apparent fascination, making appropriately enthusiastic sounds at all the right moments. "You should really take a vacation too." Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look tired. When was the last time you took time off?" "You're probably right," I replied, my smile never wavering. "I've been thinking about my future lately. Maybe after the wedding I'll take some time to reassess things." My mother's face brightened. My father's shoulders relaxed. Vanessa exchanged a knowing glance with them. They thought I was signaling surrender, waving a white flag before the battle had even begun. They thought I was already broken. Over the following weeks, I became the daughter they'd always wanted me to be. Compliant, enthusiastic, slightly dim. I showed up to every wedding-related event with a smile. I complimented every decision. I never questioned, never challenged, never asserted an opinion they didn't want to hear. I was boring, helpful, forgettable, and they became careless. "I think we were worried for nothing," my mother told my father one Sunday, not bothering to lower her voice, even though I was 10 feet away, supposedly absorbed in my phone. "She's actually being helpful for once. No drama, no demands for attention." "She knows her place," my father replied. Finally. Vanessa grew bolder with each passing week. At a family dinner, she leaned across the table and said, "Honestly, Caroline, you should think about taking time off after my wedding. Maybe the company is too much stress. You've seemed really overwhelmed lately." I looked up from my salmon, my expression concerned. "You might be right. I have been feeling the pressure. Maybe I need to step back, focus on other things." She smiled, satisfied. My mother reached over and patted my hand. "That's very mature of you, sweetheart." They started discussing their plans in front of me, assuming I wasn't paying attention or was too stupid to understand the implications. At one dinner, my father spoke openly about new leadership directions for the company and fresh energy at the executive level. I kept my eyes on my phone, scrolling through emails, my face blank. But I heard every word. I cataloged every slip, every revealed detail, every piece of their strategy. They thought I was beaten. They thought I'd already accepted my fate. But alone in my office late at night, after the building had emptied and the cleaning crew had finished their rounds, I fought a different battle. The rational part of my brain, the CEO part, knew exactly what this was. A hostile takeover dressed up as family planning. Corporate warfare wrapped in the language of concern and love. I'd seen this play out in business 100 times. The only difference was that the betrayers shared my DNA. But there was another part of me, smaller and more painful, that still wanted to believe I was wrong. That whispered maybe I'd misheard. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe my family actually loved me, and this was all some terrible misunderstanding. That part of me wanted to walk into my father's study and ask him directly, wanted to give them a chance to tell me I'd gotten it wrong. I sat at my desk at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, staring at the folder labeled Project Phoenix, and forced myself to choose. The daughter who wanted to be loved, or the CEO who knew how to survive. I chose the CEO. I opened the document I'd been building and began adding new sections. First, targets. I needed Richard Crawford and Helen Zhang solidly on my side. Marcus Chen would be harder. He was ambitious and pragmatic, but I could offer him something he wanted. I needed to identify every board member's pressure points, every shareholder's concerns, every possible vote. Second timeline. 3 months until the wedding. I needed to move carefully, quietly, building my case without alerting them to what I was doing. Third, evidence. I had my grandfather's recording and the 2 wills. I needed more. Financial records showing any irregularities in how my parents had managed company funds. Documentation of the proxy votes they were arranging. Proof of the manipulated video they'd created. Fourth, resources. My own money. My reputation. My knowledge of the company and its operations. My grandfather's tools, whatever they were. Fifth, rules of engagement. Everything had to be legal, documented, airtight. I couldn't give them any ammunition to use against me. No emotional outbursts, no confrontations, no evidence of instability or vindictiveness. I worked until 4 a.m. building the framework of their destruction. When I finally closed my laptop and looked at my reflection in the dark window, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me had cold eyes and a set jaw. She looked like someone who could do what needed to be done. The next morning, I met my parents for breakfast at their club. I wore a soft pink sweater, kept my makeup light, and smiled warmly when they greeted me. Over Eggs Benedict, I asked about the wedding menu options, listened to my mother describe the 7-course meal they'd planned, and suggested they might want to offer a vegetarian option for guests with dietary restrictions. "That's very thoughtful," my mother said, surprised. I smiled. "I just want everything to be perfect for Vanessa." They had their plan, but so did I. While I perfected my performance for my family, I began quietly building something they would never see coming. The first piece was Richard Crawford. I called him on a Monday morning and suggested lunch. "Nothing formal," I said. "Just wanted to pick your brain about some company history." We met at Peter Luger's, a dimly lit steakhouse in Brooklyn, where business deals had been made for generations. Richard ordered his usual porterhouse rare. I ordered the same. "I've been thinking a lot about grandfather lately," I said, cutting into my steak. "How he made decisions, what mattered to him. I want to make sure I'm honoring his legacy properly." Richard set down his fork, his 72-year-old eyes suddenly sharp. "Why do you ask?" I kept my tone casual, almost wistful. "I've been reviewing old company documents, the original bylaws, the incorporation papers, his notes from board meetings, trying to understand his philosophy." Richard studied me for a long moment. "Your grandfather was a man of principle. He believed business should be conducted with integrity, that family meant loyalty, and that leadership was a sacred trust." He leaned forward slightly. "If you ever find anything concerning anything that doesn't align with those principles, you know you can come to me, right?" "I appreciate that," I said, meeting his eyes. "More than you know." We talked for another hour about company history, about the early years, about my grandfather's vision. When we parted, Richard squeezed my shoulder. "He'd be proud of you, Caroline. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." 2 days later, I had coffee with Helen Zhang at a quiet cafe near her apartment. Helen was 68, whip-smart, and owned 8% of company shares. She'd been one of the first female executives in manufacturing back in the 80s, and my grandfather had mentored her when others dismissed her. I used the same approach, asking about his decision-making process, his values. Helen was more direct. "Your parents haven't run things the way James would have wanted. I've had concerns for years, but never enough proof to act." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Are you asking me these questions for a reason?" "I'm just trying to be a good steward of what he built," I said carefully. "If that ever requires support," she said, "you have mine." Marcus Chen was the hardest sell, and I saved him for last. Marcus was 55, brilliant, ruthless, and owned 12% of voting shares. He'd been pushing for aggressive expansion that I'd resisted, and we'd clashed repeatedly in board meetings. But I needed him, and that meant being honest about what that honesty would cost me. We met at his office in Midtown, all glass and steel and intimidating minimalism. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to ask you something hypothetical. If there were financial irregularities at the board level, what would be the proper process for addressing it?" Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. "How hypothetical are we talking?" "Very hypothetical," I said. "In that hypothetical," he said slowly, "I'd want to see evidence. Real, documented, unimpeachable evidence. And I'd want to know what's in it for me." I appreciated his candor. "If evidence existed, would you be interested in seeing it?" "Very interested." His eyes glinted. "Provided the person bringing that evidence was prepared to make certain accommodations for my support." We negotiated for 30 minutes. He wanted a permanent board seat and my backing for his Southeast Asia expansion. I agreed. We shook hands. I didn't trust Marcus Chen, but I understood him, which was almost better. While I recruited allies, I gathered ammunition. As CEO, I had the authority to order internal audits, and I commissioned one with specific focus on executive expense reconciliation. The auditor, a meticulous woman named Jennifer Torres, who had no idea what she was really looking for, delivered her findings 3 weeks later. "I found some irregularities," she said, sliding a folder across my desk. $187,000 in questionable expenses over the past 2 years. I opened the folder. Corporate credit cards used for personal vacations to Tuscany and Monaco labeled as business development. Wire transfers to consulting firms with no employees, no offices, no services rendered. Bonuses paid to shell companies registered to my parents' personal attorney. "Prepare a detailed report," I told Jennifer. "But keep it confidential. I need to investigate further before bringing this to the board." She nodded, understanding that some discoveries required discretion. I copied everything to 3 separate encrypted drives, storing them in different locations. Then I spent my nights in the company archives photographing every page of my grandfather's original bylaws, looking for the tools he'd promised me. But I had one more critical decision to make. David Park, my CFO for the past 5 years, had access to everything. I needed to know if I could trust him, so I set a trap. We were working late on a Thursday reviewing budget projections when I said casually, "David, hypothetically, if someone discovered that board members were misusing company funds, what would be the appropriate response?" David stopped typing. His hands went still on the keyboard. He looked at me directly, his expression unreadable. "Is this hypothetical?" The moment stretched between us. Everything depended on what I said next, how much I was willing to risk. I thought about my grandfather's voice on that tape about trust and loyalty and the tools he'd left me. "No," I said. David closed his laptop with deliberate care. For a moment he said nothing, and I wondered if I'd miscalculated catastrophically. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Your grandfather hired me 30 years ago when 12 other companies rejected me because of my accent. They said I didn't fit their culture. He said he didn't care where I came from, only whether I could do the job." His jaw tightened. "I owed him everything. If someone is betraying his legacy, betraying what he built..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I saw the steel in his eyes. "I need you to do something that might seem like betrayal," I said. "Something that will look like you've turned against me." I explained the plan. My parents would eventually try to recruit someone inside someone with access to my strategies and plans. When they approached David, he would accept. He would pretend to be turned, feed them information that seemed valuable but was actually false. He would make them overconfident, convince them their plan was working perfectly. They might offer you money, I said. Take it. Document everything. They might ask for inside information about my decisions, my mental state, my plans. Give them lies wrapped in enough truth to be believable. David was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he nodded slowly. When do we start? Tomorrow, I said. And David. No one can know about this. Not the lawyers I'll eventually hire, not the other shareholders. Your reactions to everything I do need to be genuine because they'll be watching for tells. I understand, he said. Your grandfather taught me something important. Sometimes the best way to protect something you love is to look like you've abandoned it. Over the next month, I continued my double life. At family dinners, I smiled and asked about seating charts. In board meetings, I presented quarterly projections and maintained my competent, slightly boring demeanor. But late at night, I built the architecture of their destruction piece by careful piece. Every smile I gave them was a lie, and I was getting better at lying. I had allies and evidence, but I needed a weapon. I found it at 2:30 on a Wednesday morning in the company archive, surrounded by binders that smelled of dust and decades. I'd been working through the original incorporation documents for hours, reading every amendment, every procedural change my grandfather had made over 60 years of leadership. Most of it was standard corporate language, voting procedures, quorum requirements, stock transfer protocols. My eyes burned from reading outdated legal text under fluorescent lights. Then I turned to a 1968 amendment handwritten in my grandfather's careful script. Article 7, Section 3. Emergency Shareholder Provisions. I sat up straighter, my exhaustion forgotten. In the event of immediate fiduciary concern, or evidence of breach of duty by board members, shareholders representing 40% or more of voting shares may petition for an emergency board review. Standard notice periods may be reduced to 72 hours upon presentation of prima facie evidence to the board secretary. I read it 3 times, my heart racing. This amendment had been added in 1968, right after a scandal at a competitor where corrupt board members had looted the company while shareholders were powerless to act quickly enough. My grandfather had seen what happened when good people lacked the tools to fight back, so he'd built in a fail-safe, a nuclear option for exactly this situation. 72 hours, not the standard 10-day notice period. Just 3 days if I could prove immediate fiduciary concern and gather 40% of voting shares. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page of the amendment, every clause, every definition. This was it. This was the tool my grandfather had promised me. But I had a problem. I owned 8% of voting shares. Richard Crawford owned 10%. Helen Zhang owned 8%. Marcus Chen owned 12%. That gave me 38%, 2 points short of what I needed. I'd have to secure commitments from 2 smaller shareholders, Michael Torres with 1% and Patricia Wu with 1%. They'd both worked closely with my grandfather and might be sympathetic, but they were also cautious. First, I needed to lock down Marcus. I called him the next morning. I need a meeting, breakfast, the 4 Seasons, tomorrow. Marcus didn't ask questions. 7 a.m. I arrived at 6:50, ordered coffee, and had the folder ready when Marcus sat down at 7 exactly. He was wearing a Tom Ford suit and looking at me with those calculating eyes that had made him one of the most successful investors in the city. I need your support for something, I said without preamble. What's in it for me? He asked, because of course he did. I'd prepared for this. After this is over, you get a permanent seat on a reconstituted board, and I'll support your Southeast Asia expansion proposal. Marcus leaned back, studying me. What exactly is this? I slid the folder across the white tablecloth. Evidence of fraud, and a plan to remove the perpetrators. He opened it. Inside were copies of the audit report showing the $187,000 in fraudulent expenses, copies of both wills with the signature analysis excerpts from my grandfather's recording transcribed onto paper, and the photograph of Article 7, Section 3 with its emergency provision highlighted. Marcus read in silence for 10 minutes, his expression unreadable. His coffee grew cold. The waiter tried to take our order twice, and I waved him away. Finally, Marcus closed the folder and looked at me. When? 4 weeks, at my sister's wedding reception. That's theatrical. They chose the venue, not me. They wanted an audience. I'm giving them one. He tapped the folder. You're asking me to go against your parents, people I've worked with for years. I'm asking you to go against thieves who betrayed my grandfather's trust. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What's your position on the Southeast Asia expansion specifics? We negotiated for 20 minutes. He wanted 3 new facilities, I countered with 2 in a pilot program. He wanted a 5-year commitment, I offered 3 with renewal options. We met in the middle because we both understood this was business, not personal. Finally, he extended his hand across the table. I'm in. I had my 40%. Now I needed a lawyer. The company's regular firm was out of the question. They'd worked with my parents for years, had probably drafted some of the shell company documents I'd uncovered. I needed someone with no loyalty to my family and every reason to want to see this through. I found her through a recommendation from Helen Zhang. Sarah Chen, 38 years old, partner at Morrison & Associates, specialist in corporate governance disputes, and the daughter of Maria Chen, who'd worked in our warehouse for 20 years before my father blocked her promotion with a comment about how those people weren't management material. Sarah had been 14 years old when her mother came home crying that night. She'd never forgotten. We met at her firm's offices on a Friday afternoon. I'd blocked out my entire day. She'd cleared her schedule too. Tell me everything, she said. I talked for 5 hours. I showed her the 2 wills, played my grandfather's recording, walked through the audit findings, explained the emergency shareholder provision, detailed my parents' plan to humiliate me at the wedding. Sarah took notes, asked piercing questions, and twice called in her partners to review specific pieces of evidence. At 8 p.m., she finally sat back. You have them. The will tampering alone is potentially criminal, undue influence, exploitation of diminished capacity. The corporate fraud is definitely federal wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. But here's the risk: if we move wrong, even slightly wrong, they'll claim this is a personal vendetta, a daughter with a grudge weaponizing corporate procedures. We need to be surgical. What do you need from me? Time and money. 3 weeks to prepare. $150,000 in legal fees. I didn't hesitate. Done. I'll wire the retainer today. We spent the next 3 weeks building an airtight case. Sarah and her team prepared evidence packets for every shareholder, professionally bound documents with tabs, exhibits, and legal citations. They researched precedent for the emergency provision, finding 3 cases where similar bylaws had been successfully invoked. They drafted procedures for the 72-hour notice period, including affidavits from the board secretary confirming proper notice would be given. They prepared backup plans for every possible challenge, questions about procedure, claims of improper notice, arguments about evidence admissibility. Your parents will have lawyers, Sarah warned. Good ones. Probably Thompson and Associates. They're expensive and aggressive. They'll try to block this procedurally before we ever get to the evidence. Can they? Not if we do this right. The bylaw is clear and your grandfather's drafting was meticulous, but we need to follow every rule perfectly. The cost climbed to $150,000: retainer, partner hours, paralegal, research, expert consultations. I paid it all from my personal savings money I'd accumulated over 15 years of work. Every dollar I'd saved for a future. I'd once imagined a house. Maybe a family, something beyond the office, now went toward destroying the family I had. On the Sunday before the wedding, Sarah and I met one final time to review the plan. She laid out the timeline: the announcement at 3:15 p.m., the evidence presentation at 3:30, the formal notice of emergency shareholder meeting delivered immediately after the meeting itself, 72 hours later. They're planning a show, Sarah said. A public execution dressed up as family concern. I looked at the evidence packets stacked on her conference table, at the legal briefs and shareholder notices and procedural documents that represented 3 weeks of 18-hour days. I know, I said. But they planned a show. I planned an execution. The rehearsal dinner was held at Daniel, one of those restaurants where the silverware costs more than most people's monthly grocery bills. 50 guests filled a private room draped in white silk crystal chandeliers, casting warm light over tables set with orchids and gold-rimmed china. The bill for the evening was $25,000. I knew because I'd overheard my mother bragging about it on the phone. I sat at the family table wearing a navy dress I'd bought specifically for tonight, conservative, unremarkable, the kind of thing that wouldn't draw attention. My hair was pulled back in a simple twist. I'd applied minimal makeup. I looked like exactly what they thought I was, the boring older sister, the workaholic who didn't know how to celebrate present but peripheral. I watched them as if from very far away. My mother laughing at something Bradley's father said, her hand on Vanessa's arm, proprietary and proud. Vanessa herself radiant in a white rehearsal dress that had probably cost $3,000, accepting congratulations and compliments like they were her natural due. Bradley beside her, pleasant and forgettable, exactly the kind of man my parents had always wanted in the family, connected, compliant, controllable. And my father holding court at the head of the table, already half drunk on expensive wine, and the anticipation of tomorrow's triumph. He stood at 8:30 tapping his glass with a knife. The room fell silent. I watched him gather himself, straightening his shoulders, assuming the bearing of a man about to deliver important words. Tomorrow. He began, his voice carrying that particular blend of warmth and authority he'd perfected over decades. We celebrate not just a marriage but a new chapter for our family. Vanessa and Bradley represent the future, young, connected, ready to lead. He paused, and his eyes found me across the table. Some people work hard. The emphasis was subtle but unmistakable. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. But true success requires something more. Vision, charm, the ability to inspire others to build connections that matter. Vanessa has always had that quality. That natural grace that can't be taught or earned through mere effort. Vanessa was beaming, her cheeks flushed with pleasure and champagne. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin as if overcome with emotion. She is our true heir, my father concluded. The future of everything we've built. The applause was polite but uncomfortable. I could see it in the faces around the room, the slight frowns, the exchanged glances, the people who knew I was CEO, but were too polite to question why the father of the bride was essentially announcing my obsolescence at his younger daughter's rehearsal dinner. I raised my glass along with everyone else. I made direct eye contact with my father across the table and smiled. He smiled back, satisfied, interpreting my expression as resignation, as acceptance of my place in the family hierarchy. He had no idea what he was actually seeing. No idea that my smile was calculation, that I was counting down the hours until I destroyed everything he thought he'd secured. After dinner, I drove back to my apartment in Manhattan, the city lights blurring past my windows. It was nearly 11 when I let myself in, dropping my keys on the entry table, walking through rooms that had never quite felt like home. I stood before my full-length mirror in the bedroom, still wearing the bridesmaid dress. Periwinkle blue. Vanessa's choice, of course. It washed me out completely, made my skin look sallow and my eyes dull. I looked like a woman playing a role in someone else's story, which was exactly what I'd been my entire life. On my bed, I'd laid out everything I'd need tomorrow. 3 encrypted drives, each containing copies of all the evidence. Sarah Chen's business card with her personal cell number written on the back. A printed list of the 5 shareholders who'd committed their support. The key to my grandfather's safety deposit box, though I hadn't yet discovered what else it might contain. The timeline ran through my head like a military operation. 3 p.m. my father's announcement. 3:15 my response. 3:30 the evidence presentation. 4 p.m. formal notice of emergency shareholder meeting delivered to all parties. 5 p.m. the meeting convenes. 7 p.m. the vote. By the time the wedding cake was being cut, my parents would be removed from all company positions, their reputations destroyed, their carefully constructed plan in ruins. I'd planned everything perfectly. Every detail, every contingency, every possible objection anticipated and countered. So why were my hands shaking? I poured a glass of red wine and carried it to the window. My apartment overlooked Central Park, 14 stories up. The trees' dark shapes against the glow of the city. I stood there in that ridiculous dress holding my wine and let myself think about things I'd been avoiding for 3 months. My mother teaching me to ride a bike when I was 6, running beside me in the driveway, her hand steady on my back. My father carrying me on his shoulders through the Museum of Natural History when I was 5, lifting me up so I could see the dinosaurs. Were those memories real? Had they ever actually loved me? Or had even those moments been performances, investments in a daughter they were already planning to discard when she was no longer useful? I allowed myself 10 minutes. 10 minutes to grieve not for who my parents actually were, but for who I'd spent 36 years wishing they could be. 10 minutes to mourn the family I'd never actually had, the childhood I'd invented in my head to make the reality bearable. Then I drank the rest of my wine, set the glass down, and closed that door forever. My phone buzzed at 11. Text from David Park. They just contacted me, offering $500K for copies of your questionable decisions. I'm sending them fake documents tomorrow. Another text, this one from Richard Crawford. Ready when you are. Your grandfather would be proud. Marcus Chen. This better be worth it. I typed one message and sent it to all 3. Tomorrow, 3:15 p.m., wait for my signal. Then I called Sarah Chen. Any last-minute advice? I asked. Her voice was steady professional, the voice of someone who'd done this before. Yes. Don't let emotion make you hesitate. You have the truth. Use it. They're going to try to make you feel guilty like you're the villain. Remember, you're not doing this to them. They did this to themselves. You're just holding them accountable. What if I stopped, not sure how to finish the question. What if you... What? What if I'm becoming like them? Sarah was quiet for a moment. You're not. They betrayed someone who trusted them. You're protecting something they tried to steal. That's not the same thing. After we hung up, I stood at the window one last time, looking at my reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back at me had cold eyes and a set jaw. She didn't look like the daughter who'd spent her life begging for approval. She looked like someone who could do what needed to be done. Tomorrow I would walk into that ballroom as Caroline Mitchell, dutiful older sister, forgettable bridesmaid woman who knew her place. By tomorrow evening, I would walk out as something else entirely. Someone harder. Someone free. Tomorrow their perfect stage would become my battlefield. The morning broke cold and clear over Manhattan, the kind of perfect May day that wedding planners pray for. I woke at 6, my body running on adrenaline rather than the 3 hours of sleep I'd managed. I showered, dried my hair, applied makeup with hands that were surprisingly steady. The woman in the mirror looked calm, composed, ready for a celebration. She looked nothing like someone planning a massacre. The Plaza Hotel's Crystal Ballroom at 2 p.m. was a study in opulence designed to overwhelm. Sunlight poured through 18-foot windows, refracting through Waterford crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks from the ceiling. Each chandelier was worth $100,000. There were 6 of them. The floral arrangements towered 12 feet high, cascades of white orchids, roses, and peonies that filled the room with their heavy perfume. Each centerpiece cost $3,000. There were 30 of them. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the altar, the notes floating over the murmur of 200 guests, settling into chairs covered in white silk with gold sashes. The aisle runner was hand-woven lace that would be destroyed after a single use. The ceiling had been draped in white silk to soften the room's natural grandeur. Every detail screamed money status permanence. The guest list read like a directory of New York power. 3 senators, 1 from each party, careful to maintain bipartisan social connections. 2 Fortune 500 CEOs whose companies did business with Mitchell and Associates. The mayor's chief of staff. 75 shareholders and company executives, including every member of the board. Society columnists from 3 major publications. Photographers from Town and Country and Vogue. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a political announcement, a social declaration, a stage set for exactly what my father intended. I stood at the back of the room with the other bridesmaids women I'd met exactly twice during dress fittings, friends of Vanessa's whose names I'd already forgotten. The music changed. Everyone stood. And Vanessa appeared. She looked objectively like a fairy tale princess. The Vera Wang gown had cost $50,000 and every penny showed. Crystal beading caught the light as she moved, creating the illusion that she was made of starlight. The cathedral train flowed behind her like water held by two child attendants in matching silk. Her veil was antique lace, supposedly worn by our grandmother, though I'd never seen it before. She was radiant, genuinely happy, smiling at Bradley with real affection as she walked down that absurdly expensive aisle runner. Bradley waited at the altar in his Tom Ford tuxedo, and when I saw his face, I realized something I hadn't expected. He actually loved her. It was there in his eyes, in the way his breath caught when he saw her, in the stupid grin he couldn't quite control. He was a mediocre investment banker who'd been handed every advantage, but he loved my sister. And in that moment, I felt an unexpected twist of something in my chest. The ceremony was traditional, beautiful in its predictability. The officiant spoke about love, partnership, building a future together. Vanessa and Bradley exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support and cherish each other. They meant it, I thought. This part was real, even if everything around it was performance. I stood behind Vanessa as maid of honor, holding her bouquet, my face serene, and for just a moment I let myself feel it, that old, familiar longing. Not for Bradley, not for marriage itself, but for the possibility of a world where Vanessa and I could have been real sisters. Where we could have giggled together getting ready this morning. Where she might have asked my advice, shared her nervousness, wanted me beside her, because she loved me, not because tradition demanded a maid of honor. The moment passed. I checked my watch, 2:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, cocktail hour would begin. In 73 minutes, everything would change. The reception began at 3 p.m. sharp. The ballroom had been transformed during the ceremony, the chairs cleared, tables arranged, uplighting in gold washing the walls. A 12-piece band played jazz standards near the dance floor. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost $50 per bite. Wagyu beef on brioche, lobster tail with caviar, chocolate truffles dusted with actual gold leaf. I moved through the crowd like a ghost haunting her own life. People congratulated me on my sister's marriage. They admired the venue, the flowers, the bride's dress. No one mentioned the company. No one acknowledged that I was CEO of the organization that employed half the people in this room. I was invisible again, reduced to my role as the bride's sister, as if that were my only relevance, my only value. I found Richard Crawford near the bar. He was 72 years old, wearing a gray suit that had probably been custom-made in London sometime in the 1990s. He held a glass of scotch and watched the crowd with eyes that missed nothing. "Ready," he whispered when I stood beside him. I nodded once. Across the room, Marcus Chen was checking his watch. He caught my eye and gave the slightest nod. Helen Zhang sat at a nearby table, her phone in her lap, her posture alert despite her age. David Park had positioned himself at a table with other company executives, looking relaxed and convivial, giving no indication that he'd spent the past month feeding my parents carefully constructed lies. Everything was in position. All the pieces were on the board exactly where they needed to be. At 3:12 p.m., I saw my father moving toward the stage where the band was playing. He had that look on his face, that particular expression of satisfaction and certainty. He thought he knew exactly how the next hour would unfold. He'd rehearsed his speech, prepared his video, secured his votes. He thought he'd accounted for every variable, right on schedule. And then they made their move. My father took the microphone from the band leader at exactly 3:15 p.m. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." The band stopped mid-song. Conversations died. 200 faces turned toward the stage where Robert Mitchell stood in his custom tuxedo, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch about to bestow wisdom upon his gathered subjects. "We're gathered today to celebrate love and new beginnings." He began, his voice warm and practiced. "But before we cut the cake, I have another important announcement about new beginnings at our family company." I stood near the back of the room, my face carefully neutral, my hands loose at my sides. This was it. The moment they'd spent 3 months planning. I watched my father like I was watching a stage performance, noting every calculated gesture, every rehearsed pause. My eldest daughter, Caroline, has been CEO of Mitchell & Associates for 3 years now. He located me in the crowd, his expression a masterpiece of paternal concern. "She's worked very hard." The emphasis on very was subtle but unmistakable. The implication clear: too hard, obsessively hard, unhealthily hard. But the stress has taken a toll. Those who know her have seen it, the exhaustion, the isolation, the personal sacrifices that come from putting work before everything else. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw heads turning, people trying to find me, curious to see how I was reacting. I stood perfectly still, my expression unchanged. "After deep family discussions," my father continued, "Caroline has decided to step down as CEO to focus on her personal life, to find balance, perhaps even to find love." He smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth, as if this announcement were an act of compassion rather than execution. "We fully support her decision to prioritize her well-being." The room was silent, except for a few uncomfortable coughs. I could see the calculation in people's faces, trying to decide if this made sense, if they'd missed signs of my supposed breakdown, wondering if they should feel sorry for me or judgmental. My father pressed forward before anyone could process too deeply. "It's time for new energy, new vision, new leadership that can take Mitchell & Associates into the future. I'm proud to announce that Vanessa will be stepping into the CEO role, bringing fresh perspectives, social connections, and the kind of modern thinking our company needs to thrive in today's markets." Vanessa stood from her seat at the head table. Her wedding dress caught the light as she moved, creating that intentional fairy tale effect. She walked to the stage with practiced grace, and I had to admit she looked the part. Young, beautiful, confident. The kind of person you'd want leading your company if you didn't know that her only professional experience was posting filtered photos on Instagram. Some guests applauded, mostly Bradley's family and their social circle people who had no stake in the company and thought this was simply another charming wedding announcement. But the company employees and shareholders, the people who actually understood what was happening, sat frozen. I watched Helen Zhang pull out her phone, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Marcus Chen's face was carved from stone, revealing nothing. Richard Crawford's hand tightened on his scotch glass, his knuckles white. My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though whether from joy or performance was impossible to tell. She'd always been the better actor. Then the video began. The massive screens that had been showing wedding photos throughout cocktail hour went dark. Somber music swelled. Text appeared, "Mitchell & Associates, a company at a crossroads." I watched my own face appear on screen. Footage from the company holiday party last December, me holding a champagne glass, laughing at something someone had said. But the editing made it look different. The same clip repeated 3 times in rapid succession, making it appear I was drinking compulsively, refilling my glass again and again in what looked like concerning behavior. It was masterfully done. Anyone who didn't know the original context would see exactly what they were meant to see: a woman with a drinking problem. More footage. Me at board meetings looking tired. The clips were real. I had been tired working 16-hour days to close the Hartwell contract, but stripped of context, they looked like exhaustion born of incompetence rather than dedication. Me walking out of my office carrying file boxes. I'd been taking work home that night, but edited this way it looked like I was leaving in disgrace, already packing up my professional life. Then the voiceovers began. Concerned employees speaking in hushed, worried tones. She seemed increasingly erratic. We never knew what mood she'd be in. She was never around when we needed her. Always traveling, always absent. We were worried about the company's future. Honestly, we were worried about her. I recognized none of the voices. They were actors paid $5,000 each according to what I'd overheard that night in my father's study, but they sounded convincing, troubled, sincere. By the time the video ended, the room was thick with murmurs. I could feel the shift in energy, the way public opinion was being manufactured in real time. Some guests were looking at me with pity. Poor Caroline worked herself into a breakdown. Others with judgment, irresponsible, unstable. Perhaps they'd never trusted her leadership anyway. My father's voice cut through the noise. We love Caroline and want what's best for her. Today is about supporting her decision to step back to heal, to find herself again. He was still smiling, that warm, compassionate smile. Let's all wish her well on this new journey. The room was silent, waiting. 200 pairs of eyes found me standing near the back, the failed CEO in the ugly bridesmaid dress. The cautionary tale about women who prioritize career over family, the daughter who'd finally been put in her proper place. This was the moment I was supposed to break. Supposed to cry or flee or stand there paralyzed with humiliation while they completed my destruction. But instead of breaking, I rose. I walked through the silent crowd toward the stage. My heels clicked on the marble floor, each step echoing in the absolute quiet. I wasn't hurrying. I wasn't running. I moved with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. 200 people watched me climb the 3 steps to the stage. I stood next to my father for a moment, close enough to smell his cologne, the same scent he'd worn my entire life. He was smiling, certain this was my graceful exit, my public acceptance of defeat. I took the microphone from his hand. He released it willingly. My voice when I spoke was clear and calm, almost gentle. Thank you, Father, for that creative introduction. You're right about one thing today is about new beginnings. I paused. The room leaned forward, 200 people holding their breath. I am here to announce my resignation as CEO of Mitchell & Associates, effective immediately. The words landed like a physical blow. My mother exhaled audibly from her seat, a sound of pure relief. Vanessa's face transformed, glowing with triumph, with vindication, with the certainty that she'd finally gotten what she always deserved. My father's shoulders relaxed. His smile broadened. They'd won. It was over. I saw the devastation ripple through the shareholders and employees. Helen Zhang's face fell. 2 executives from the operations team looked at each other in horror. Richard Crawford actually started to stand, confusion and anger warring on his 72-year-old face. This wasn't the plan. What was I doing? I held up one hand. Wait. But before I step away from the company my grandfather built, I want to honor his memory. Many of you knew James Mitchell. You knew his values, his vision, his integrity. On the massive screens behind me, the character assassination video disappeared. In its place, photographs of my grandfather began to appear. Images I'd selected carefully over the past 3 weeks, pulled from company archives and family albums. My grandfather in 1952, standing in front of the original factory, young and determined. My grandfather on the factory floor in 1978, sleeves rolled up, talking to workers whose names he knew by heart. My grandfather receiving the Manufacturing Excellence Award in 1995. My grandfather shaking hands with employees at the company's 50th anniversary celebration. The mood in the room shifted. People's faces softened. This seemed graceful, appropriate. A loving tribute from a daughter honoring the man who'd built everything. Grandfather believed in 3 things above all. I continued, my voice still gentle, but with steel underneath now. Integrity, honesty, loyalty. He built this company on those principles. He believed business should be conducted with honor, that family meant protection, that leadership was a sacred trust. My father was nodding along, thinking I was wrapping up, preparing to exit with dignity. He left me something before he died, something important. I'd like to share it with all of you, especially those of you who knew him and loved him. I turned to signal the audio-visual team. The 2 technicians looked at my father, uncertain. Robert made a sharp, cutting motion with his hand. Stop this. Stop this now. But the lead technician, a union man named Marcus Rodriguez, whose job I'd protected during the recession when my father wanted to outsource AV services, caught my eye and nodded. He owed me. And he remembered. Static filled the ballroom's sound system. Then my grandfather's voice, weak but unmistakable. "Caroline, my dear girl, if you're hearing this, it means they succeeded." 200 people froze. A dead man was speaking. "I'm recording this in November 2009. Your parents visit me every day now, pressuring me. They bring lawyers, documents, papers to sign. They say you don't need the money, that you're strong, that you'll be successful on your own. They say Vanessa needs protection, needs security." My mother's face had gone white. My father stood frozen beside me, his hand half raised as if he could stop the recording through sheer will. "I'm old, Caroline. I'm tired. And I'm sick. The doctors say my mind is going. Early Alzheimer's, they call it. Your parents know this. They're using it against me. They bring documents when I'm confused, when I'm tired, when I can barely hold a pen." Vanessa's expression had shifted from triumph to confusion. She was looking at our parents, trying to understand. She clearly hadn't known about this part. This wasn't in their script. I tried to fight them. I called my attorney Harold, but they convinced me he was too old, that I needed someone new. I tried to tell the doctor what was happening, but who believes an old man with dementia? Richard Crawford was standing now, both hands gripping the back of his chair, his face fierce with recognition and rage. Marcus Chen had his phone out, recording everything. Helen Zhang was typing rapidly on her phone. The company employees were leaning forward, faces stricken, beginning to understand. "I don't have much time left, so I'm leaving you this, the truth. I see you, Caroline. I've always seen you. You are the one who has my discipline, my integrity, my drive. The company is yours by right, not by inheritance. Whatever happens to my will, whatever documents they make me sign, know that I tried to stop them. Know that I love you. I've left you something they can't take, the truth and the tools to fight back when you're ready." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. You could hear people breathing, hear the rustle of fabric as bodies shifted in chairs, hear someone's phone vibrate on a table. My father stood beside me, speechless for perhaps the first time in his life. My mother had both hands over her mouth. Vanessa looked small, suddenly lost in her enormous wedding dress, a child who'd stumbled into something she didn't understand. I still held the microphone. My expression hadn't changed. My voice when I spoke was calm as still water. Interesting, isn't it, a man's final words, his last testimony about what was done to him when he was too weak to fight back. I let that sink in for 3 heartbeats. Now let me show you what else I found. They thought my resignation was surrender. It was the opening move. I began with the wills. The screen behind me split into 2 columns. On the left, a document header appeared, James Mitchell's Last Will and Testament, January 2009. On the right, James Mitchell's Last Will and Testament, February 2010, filed upon death. My voice shifted. No more gentleness, no more sentiment. This was CEO Caroline, now presenting to a board clinical and precise. On the left, my grandfather's original will, properly witnessed by his attorney of 30 years, Harold Brennan, now deceased. Equal distribution to both granddaughters' company shares, property investments. Approximately $15 million each. I let that number settle. On the right, a revised will executed 2 months later, 1 month before my grandfather's death. Witnessed by attorney Martin Weiss, who received a $50,000 consulting fee from my parents the same month and 2 paralegals from his office. This will leaves 80% to my sister, 20% to me. The documents were clear enough to read from anywhere in the room. I watched people squinting at the screens, leaning forward, beginning to understand the implications. My grandfather's signature on the second will was analyzed by 3 independent forensic document experts. Their unanimous conclusion, signed under severe physical duress, consistent with someone in late-stage illness being pressured to sign against their wishes. The screen now showed signature analysis, blown-up images of my grandfather's signature. On the left, his signature from 2008, strong, steady, confident strokes. On the right, his signature from February 2010, shaking, uncertain, the letters barely formed. You didn't need to be an expert to see the difference. Medical records appeared next, properly redacted, but damning. Patient showing signs of early-stage dementia, easily confused, susceptible to suggestion. The date, October 2009, 4 months before the second will was signed. My father finally found his voice. "This is absurd. That will was properly executed and legally filed." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the audience, my voice level. "Legal and ethical are not the same thing, Father. You would know." I moved to the next section before he could respond. "But the will is personal family drama. Let's talk about the company." New documents flooded the screens. Bank statements, credit card reports, wire transfer records. I'd organized them like a prosecutor building a case, each piece of evidence numbered, dated, irrefutable. Over the past 2 years, my parents, serving as board members with fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders, have transferred $187,000 in company funds for personal use. I clicked through the evidence systematically. Here, $23,000 to a consulting firm called Beaumont Advisory. This company is registered to Bradley's father's home address. It has no employees, no office, no website, no services rendered. The money was transferred in, then immediately transferred to my parents' personal account. Bradley's face had gone red. His father looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Here, $31,000 charged to the company credit card for business development in Tuscany. I have the hotel receipts. The Grand Hotel Continental in Siena. 7 nights. No business meetings, no clients. Just a vacation paid for by 800 employees' hard work. My mother tried to speak. Those were legitimate business. I cut her off with a single look. She sat back down. Here, wire transfers totaling $94,000 to 3 shell corporations in Delaware. All 3 are registered to the same law firm that handles my parents' personal estate planning. No services provided, no contracts, just money flowing from company accounts to personal accounts through corporate shells. Marcus Chen was no longer recording. He was taking notes, his expression hard. Several board members had their phones out, photographing the screens, documenting everything. And here, $39,000 in executive bonuses paid to my parents outside normal compensation structures without board approval, in direct violation of our bylaws. The shareholders were standing now, moving closer to see the documents more clearly. I could hear the murmurs, the anger building. There's a full forensic audit report prepared by an independent accounting firm available for any shareholder who requests it. 187 pages. It's very thorough. I paused, let the evidence sink in. Then I softened my voice slightly. This was the moment where I moved from prosecutor to leader. 30 minutes ago, my father announced my resignation. Here's the truth: I haven't resigned. I'm not resigning. What I am doing is invoking Article 7, Section 3 of the company bylaws, the emergency shareholder provision. The 1968 amendment appeared on screen, my grandfather's handwriting clear and deliberate. My grandfather added this provision after watching a competitor company get looted by corrupt board members, while shareholders were powerless to act quickly. He wanted to ensure that if this company ever faced immediate fiduciary concern, the shareholders would have the power to respond immediately. I read the key passage. In the event of immediate fiduciary concern or evidence of breach of duty by board members, shareholders representing 40% or more of voting shares may petition for an emergency board review. I looked out at the crowd, found the faces I needed. I have secured commitments from shareholders representing 42% of voting shares. We are formally requesting an emergency board meeting pursuant to this provision. Richard Crawford stood, his 72-year-old voice clear and strong. I, Richard Crawford, representing 10% of voting shares, second this motion and demand immediate board review. Helen Zhang rose. Helen Zhang, 8% voting shares. I support this motion. Marcus Chen stood, his expression unreadable. Marcus Chen, 12% voting shares. supporting. Two other shareholders, Michael Torres and Patricia Wu, stood as well, their 1% each, suddenly crucial, suddenly powerful. My voice remained steady. Under this provision, standard notice periods are waived when prima facie evidence of breach is presented, which it has been. All shareholders are hereby formally noticed. Emergency board meeting will convene in 72 hours, May 15th at 2 p.m. at company headquarters. All voting shareholders will receive formal written notice within 24 hours. I set down the microphone with deliberate care, and in the silence that followed, I walked off the stage, and one by one they stood. The wedding reception disintegrated within minutes. Vanessa ran from the ballroom, her $50,000 dress trailing behind her crystal beading, catching the light one last time. Bradley chased after her, looking confused and devastated, a groom abandoned at his own reception. My mother collapsed into a chair near the head table, hyperventilating, her face buried in her hands. Two of her society friends rushed to her side, but I noticed they kept their distance, careful not to be photographed too close to the scandal. My father came at me as I descended the stage steps. "You ungrateful!" Richard Crawford materialized between us, his 72-year-old body suddenly solid as a wall. "Don't say another word, Robert. There are 200 witnesses here, and several of them are attorneys. Anything you say right now will be used against you." Security guards appeared at the edges of the ballroom. I'd alerted them hours earlier, just in case, told them there might be a disruption that required intervention. They moved in smoothly, professionally, positioning themselves to prevent any physical altercation. Guests were already leaving, gathering coats and purses, whispering to each other. I watched the exodus, people I'd known for years, colleagues, clients, family, friends, all fleeing like the ballroom was on fire. By 4 o'clock, the crystal ballroom was empty except for the wedding planners and catering staff who stood among the abandoned centerpieces looking shell-shocked. By 6 p.m. it was on Twitter. Someone had recorded parts of the confrontation on their phone. The hashtag was already trending, CEO Revenge. By 8 p.m. Business Insider had published a story, not the one my parents had leaked, but a new one. CEO exposes parents' alleged fraud at sister's wedding. By midnight, it had gone national. Cable news was running segments. My face was everywhere. The next 3 days were chaos compressed into 72 hours. My parents hired Thompson and Associates exactly as I'd predicted. 5 attorneys, all expensive, all known for aggressive tactics. They filed an emergency injunction Tuesday morning, trying to stop the board meeting, claiming improper notice and procedural violations. Sarah Chen was in court by Tuesday afternoon, countering with the exact bylaw language, citing precedent from a 1974 Delaware corporate case where similar emergency provisions had been upheld. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd spent 20 years in corporate law, read the bylaws, read the precedent, and denied the injunction. "The language is clear," she said. "The procedures were followed. The meeting will proceed as scheduled." Shareholders received their formal notices by courier and email Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, the media had camped outside company headquarters. I gave one statement standing on the steps with Sarah beside me. "This is about protecting my grandfather's legacy and the 800 employees who depend on this company's integrity." Then I went inside and didn't come out. Thursday arrived. May 15th, 2 p.m. The company's main conference room had a capacity of 40 people. We packed in 23 voting shareholders, their attorneys, a court-appointed secretary, and a notary public. Reporters waited in the lobby. They weren't allowed in, but everything would be public record. My parents sat on one side of the long table with their 5 Thompson and Associates attorneys. I sat on the other side with Sarah Chen and her paralegal. The room smelled like expensive cologne and fear. Thomas Whitney, our longest-serving independent board member at age 69, took his seat at the head of the table. He was known for being unflappable, the kind of man who'd navigated 40 years of corporate governance without ever raising his voice. He opened the meeting with bureaucratic precision. "This emergency meeting has been properly called under Article 7, Section 3 of the company bylaws. We're here to review evidence of alleged fiduciary breach and vote on appropriate actions. James Thompson." My parents' lead attorney argued for 30 minutes. He was good, polished, aggressive, charismatic. He called the procedures improper, the evidence questionable, the whole thing a personal vendetta from an emotionally unstable CEO who couldn't handle family conflict. He painted me as vindictive as someone weaponizing corporate procedures for personal revenge. Sarah Chen responded with 15 minutes of pure legal precision. Every procedural step had been documented. Every piece of evidence had been authenticated by 3 independent sources. The bylaw language was unambiguous. She presented the forensic accounting report, 187 pages bound professionally with tabs and exhibits. She presented the will analysis, 43 pages, from 3 different forensic document experts, all reaching the same conclusion. She presented medical records proving my grandfather's diminished capacity properly redacted to protect privacy while establishing the relevant facts. Then she played her trump card. The recording you heard at the reception has been authenticated by Dr. Patricia Morrison, one of the country's foremost forensic audio specialists. Dr. Morrison appeared via video conference testifying under oath. I spent 200 hours analyzing this recording using spectral analysis, magnetic tape degradation patterns, and voice stress analysis. The recording is unaltered and authentic, dated to November 2009 based on magnetic tape degradation. No splicing detected, no AI generation markers, no manipulation of any kind. Thompson tried to challenge her credentials, her methodology, her conclusions. She dismantled every argument with the patient precision of someone who'd testified in dozens of federal cases. After 3 hours of presentation and debate, Thomas Whitney called for the vote. Motion on the floor. Remove Robert and Patricia Mitchell from all board positions, immediately freeze their company compensation pending investigation, refer all evidence to federal prosecutors, and appoint an interim oversight committee. Each shareholder voted publicly their name and vote recorded by the court secretary. Richard Crawford, 4, Helen Zhang, 4, Marcus Chen, 4, down the line. 19 votes for removal. 3 against Bradley's father and 2 old family friends who still believed loyalty mattered more than evidence. 1 abstention from a shareholder who'd been out of the country and hadn't fully reviewed the materials. Robert and Patricia Mitchell weren't permitted to vote on a motion concerning their own conduct. The gavel came down. Motion passes. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you are hereby removed from all board positions effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. My father exploded. You ungrateful bitch! After everything we gave you, everything we... Richard Crawford's voice cut through like steel. No, Robert. You're the ungrateful ones. James Mitchell gave you wealth status opportunity. You betrayed everything he built, everything he stood for. My mother was sobbing, her face buried in her hands. 2 security guards approached. My father looked at me one last time, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes. He saw something in mine too, not triumph, not anger, just cold finality. As they were escorted out, I remained seated, hands folded on the conference table. Sarah leaned over. You did it. I nodded once. Outside, I could hear reporters shouting questions. Inside, shareholders began approaching, shaking my hand, congratulating me. I accepted it all from somewhere very far away. They thought they'd ended me. I'd only just begun. 5 days after the board vote, I was still at my desk at 9 p.m. on a Friday, working through the restructuring plan for the board's interim oversight committee. My assistant had left at 6. The building was nearly empty, just the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of the cleaning crew on the lower floors. A knock on my door. Come in. It was Vanessa. I hadn't seen her since she'd run from the ballroom in tears, her wedding reception collapsing around her. The woman who entered my office looked nothing like the princess bride from 5 days ago. No makeup, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and an oversized sweatshirt, clothing I'd never seen her in, had never imagined she owned. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy from crying. Please, she said, her voice small. Just 5 minutes. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, but said nothing. She sat down, her hands trembling in her lap. I'm so sorry. The words came out in a rush. I didn't know about the will. I swear to God, Caroline, I didn't know grandfather didn't want it that way. I didn't know about the company money either. They told me you were stepping down willingly, that this was all family planning, that it was for the best. Her voice cracked. I've been their puppet my whole life, and I didn't even realize it until you cut the strings. I watched her cry, analyzing every word, every gesture, every tear. Was this real? Or was this another performance, another manipulation in a family that had perfected the art of manipulation? They planned everything. She continued, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. My major in college, I wanted to study art. Did you know that I wanted to go to RISD? But Dad said business school or nothing. My friends, they vetted them, made sure they were the right kind of people. And Bradley. She laughed bitterly. Did you know they introduced us? His father and Dad arranged it like a business merger. Drinks at the club, carefully orchestrated meetings. I thought he chose me. I thought I was special. She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. I thought I was chosen, but I was just useful. A pretty face they could parade around, marry off to the right family. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unchanged. Everything she was saying tracked with what I'd suspected, with what I'd seen in her journals during the investigation. But that didn't mean this confession was genuine. She could be playing a longer game, trying to position herself as a victim to avoid consequences. You're the strong one, Vanessa said. You always were. You got out. You built something real. I never did. I'm 32 years old and I've never made a single real decision in my life. She took a shaky breath. Let me help you. I'll testify against them. I'll tell the prosecutors everything I know about their finances, their plans, the shell companies they set up. I'll give statements. I'll sit for depositions, whatever you need. Her voice became pleading. Just please don't destroy me in this. I know I participated. I know I was part of it, but I didn't understand what I was part of. I'll cooperate completely. I'll give back the inheritance money, all of it. I'll do whatever you need. The smart play was obvious. Vanessa's testimony would be devastating to our parents. An insider willing to detail their financial schemes, their manipulation tactics, their private conversations. Sarah would kill for this kind of witness. But could I trust her? Could I trust anyone from this family? I need time to think about this, I said finally. Leave your number with my assistant on Monday. Thank you. Vanessa stood, relief flooding her face. Thank you for even considering. I haven't decided anything. I cut her off. Go home, Vanessa. She nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind her. I sat in my dark office, the only light coming from my desk lamp and the glow of the city through the windows. I stared out at Manhattan, at the thousands of lit windows representing thousands of lives, and wondered if that had been genuine remorse or if my family was simply incapable of being genuine about anything. The weekend passed. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't make any decisions. Monday morning, I arrived at my office at 8 a.m. to find Sarah Chen already there, sitting in my reception area with her briefcase and a grim expression. They're suing you. She followed me into my office and dropped a 74-page document on my desk. Mitchell v. Mitchell. I flipped through it, my jaw tightening with every page. Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to commit fraud, unauthorized access to confidential information, breach of fiduciary duty. They were seeking $50 million in damages. Connecticut filing, Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. They're hoping for home court advantage with judges who've known them for years. I kept reading. The claims were absurd, but dangerous. They were arguing I'd fabricated evidence, manipulated shareholders, conducted an illegal audit, and staged the wedding confrontation specifically to cause maximum emotional harm. They painted me as a vindictive daughter who'd weaponized corporate procedures for personal revenge. This is desperate, Sarah said, but it's also dangerous. If even one claim sticks, if a jury believes even part of their narrative, it damages your credibility permanently. And they've retained Thompson and Associates, the same firm they used for the board meeting. These people play dirty. They'll depose everyone you know. They'll subpoena every email, every text message, every communication you've had for the past 5 years. They'll drag your personal life through discovery looking for anything that makes you look unstable or vindictive. This will be brutal. I set down the lawsuit and looked at Sarah. My voice was calm, steady. Then we fight brutally back. File a countersuit for the $187,000 in fraud. Add tortious interference with corporate governance. Add fraud in the inducement regarding the will. Make discovery go both ways. I want every email, every text, every financial record they have for the past 10 years. And file a motion to move this case to New York. We have home court advantage here, and I'm not playing on their turf. Sarah's expression shifted, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Now you're thinking like a lawyer. I've been thinking like a CEO, I said. But I'm learning. They'd lost the company, but the war had just begun. The media explosion happened faster than even Sarah had predicted. Within a week, the story had jumped from business publications to mainstream news. CNN ran a primetime segment titled "Family Business Torn Apart by Inheritance Battle," complete with dramatic music and split-screen photos of me and my parents. The New York Times published a 5,000-word feature, "When Success Breeds Resentment, the Mitchell Family Saga." I read it over coffee one morning and barely recognized the people they were describing. Twitter became a battlefield. The hashtag Team Caroline trended for 3 days straight, filled with messages like, "Finally a CEO with integrity," and "She exposed corruption that's heroic, not vindictive." But Team Mitchell trended just as hard. "She ruined her own sister's wedding, that's psychotic," and "Family betrayal is still betrayal no matter the reason." I stopped reading the comments after the first day. They were all shouting at each other, none of them knowing any of us. I hired Turner & Associates, a crisis PR firm that specialized in corporate reputation management. Their advice was simple: lean into the truth-teller narrative, control the story, humanize myself without appearing weak. They arranged a carefully controlled interview with Businessweek. I sat in their Manhattan offices under studio lights wearing a navy suit and answered questions for 2 hours. I didn't want this fight. I told the interviewer, a woman in her 50s who'd been covering business for 20 years. But when I discovered my grandfather was manipulated in his final days, when I found evidence that the company he built with his own hands was being defrauded, I had no choice. This isn't about family drama. It's about protecting 800 jobs and honoring a good man's legacy. The article ran the following week. It was sympathetic, thoughtful, balanced. My approval ratings among business leaders climbed to 68%, according to a poll conducted by Fortune magazine. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt exhausted. Because my parents weren't sitting idle. They appeared on a local Connecticut news program, a soft-focus morning show that usually covered garden parties and charity fundraisers. The interviewer lobbed them softball questions while they played their parts perfectly. My mother wore minimal makeup, her hair graying naturally, looking every bit the devastated matriarch. She cried on camera. "Our daughter has had a breakdown," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We're trying to get her help, but she's surrounded by people who are encouraging this delusion. People who want to use her pain for their own gain." My father sat beside her, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. He'd let his hair grow slightly too long, hadn't shaved as closely as usual. He looked aged, frail, wounded. "We love both our daughters," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "This company is just a company, brick-and-mortar numbers on a page. Family is forever. We're praying Caroline gets the mental health support she needs before it's too late." The anonymous leak started shortly after. Sources close to the family told tabloids about my obsessive work habits, my inability to maintain relationships, my controlling personality. The Daily Mail ran a piece with the headline, "Lonely CEO's Revenge Did Career Obsession Drive Caroline Mitchell to Destroy Her Family." The article included unflattering photos of me leaving the office at midnight looking haggard under the parking garage lights. My PR firm pushed back with facts, company growth numbers, employee testimonials, the forensic audit report. But facts were boring. Emotions stuck. The narrative was shifting and I could feel it slipping away from me despite everything I'd proven. 3 weeks into the legal battle, I noticed something else wrong. Details from my private strategy sessions with Sarah were appearing in my parents' legal filings. Arguments I'd planned to make were being preemptively countered. Evidence I intended to introduce was being challenged before I'd even mentioned it publicly. Someone was leaking information, and they had access to my most confidential planning. I narrowed down the suspects. My assistant Jessica had been with me for 5 years and had access to my calendar, my emails, everything. David Park knew all the financial details and had been in most strategy meetings. Sarah's paralegal, a recent law school graduate named Amy Chen, was young, underpaid, and potentially vulnerable to bribes. I set 3 careful traps. I told Jessica about a planned deposition of a former board member, giving her a specific false date and time. I mentioned to David that I'd found additional evidence of fraud, a completely fabricated wire transfer to a non-existent shell company. I told Amy that we were scheduling an emergency meeting with expert witnesses, giving her a fake location. Then I waited. 1 week later, my parents' attorneys filed a motion. Buried in the supporting documents was a reference to the fabricated wire transfer I'd mentioned only to David. The exact amount, the exact non-existent company name, the exact dates I'd invented. My chest tightened as I read it. I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping there was some other explanation. There wasn't. David Park, my CFO, the man who'd worked for my grandfather for 30 years. The man I'd trusted with the double agent strategy, who I'd believed was feeding my parents false information while secretly working for me. He'd been playing both sides. Or worse, he'd been playing me the entire time. The betrayal felt different than my family's. My parents had always been predictable in their selfishness. But David, I had chosen to trust him. I had extended that trust deliberately, strategically, believing in the loyalty he'd claimed to feel for my grandfather. That night I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine I didn't drink, staring at my phone. Finally, at 11 p.m., I called him. My office. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Come alone. Caroline, I hung up. The betrayal from inside hurt more than anything they'd done. David Park entered my office at 8 a.m. exactly. I was standing at the window with my back to him, arms crossed, watching the morning traffic crawl down Fifth Avenue. The city was waking up, oblivious to the confrontation about to happen 40 stories above it. "Close the door," I said without turning around. He did. The click echoed in the silent office. I let the silence stretch, let him stand there wondering what I knew how much trouble he was in. Finally, I turned. My eyes were ice. "I know you've been feeding information to my parents." David's expression didn't change. No shock, no denial, no scrambling for excuses. "Yes." Just that. One word. Flat. Final. I felt something break inside my chest. I'd hoped the trap was wrong. Hoped there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. Hoped that at least one person in this entire nightmare could be trusted. "Why?" My voice came out harder than I intended. "They offered you money. A position when they somehow reclaimed the company. What was your price, David?" He cut me off, his voice sharp. "You think I'd betray you for money?" He walked to my desk, set down his laptop, opened it, and turned the screen to face me. "Look." On the screen, encrypted folders, dozens of them organized by date, files labeled with my parents' names, their attorneys' names, timestamps of communications. Every piece of information I gave them was false. David said, his voice steady and deliberate. Every document was misleading. Every timeline was wrong. Every strategy I suggested was designed to make them overconfident and lead them into legal traps. I stared at the screen, my mind racing to catch up. David pulled up communication logs, emails between him and Sarah Chen's firm, encrypted messages coordinating exactly what false information to feed when. A detailed spreadsheet tracking what lies had been told and how my parents had incorporated them into their legal strategy. 3 weeks ago, they contacted me through an intermediary, a lawyer I'd never met, offering $500,000 to turn on you, I took the meeting. I took their money, which I immediately placed in an escrow account as evidence of attempted bribery. And then I gave them exactly what Sarah Chen and I had planned to give them: garbage, wrapped in just enough truth to be believable. He clicked through more files. We needed them to think they had inside intelligence, real access to your planning, so they'd build their entire legal strategy on false assumptions. And they did. Their current lawsuit is based on evidence they think proves you fabricated documents, but that evidence came from me and it's completely fake. When we reveal that in court, their entire case collapses. Better yet, they look like they suborned perjury and bribed a witness, both of which are crimes. I sat down slowly in my desk chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Sarah knew about this. We planned it the night after the board vote. She suggested it, actually. Said your parents would inevitably try to recruit someone inside and we should control who that someone was. He paused. We couldn't tell you because we needed your reactions to be genuine. If anyone was watching you for tells, for signs you knew about the double agent operation, they needed to see real confusion, real concern when the leaks started. I'm sorry for that. I know what it must have felt like to think I'd betrayed you. I looked at him, 58 years old, gray starting to show at his temples, wearing the same style of conservative suit he'd worn every day for the 5 years he'd been my CFO. Before that, an accountant for 25 years. 30 years total with this company. Why? I asked quietly. Why risk everything for this? David's professional mask cracked. His voice when he spoke was thick with emotion. Your grandfather hired me in 1995. I was 28, fresh out of business school with an MBA and a mountain of debt. I applied to 43 companies that year. 12 of them granted me interviews. Every single one rejected me. Some said my English wasn't good enough, even though I was born in New Jersey. Some said I didn't fit their culture. One interviewer actually told me I should try restaurants or dry cleaning, that those were better fits for people like me. He looked down at his hands. I was about to give up. Move back in with my parents. Maybe go back to Korea, start over there. Then your grandfather called me personally, said he'd read my thesis on supply chain optimization and wanted to talk. I thought it was a joke at first, but I went to the interview and he offered me a job on the spot. Can you start Monday? That was it. No hesitation, no concerns about my accent or my culture or whether I fit. His voice grew quieter. He paid for my CPA exam preparation course. When my mother got cancer 3 years later and the bills started piling up, he gave me a personal loan for $50,000 and told me to pay it back whenever I could. Not through payroll deduction, not with interest. Just whenever. When I got married, he came to my wedding at a Korean restaurant in Flushing. My entire family still talks about it, this American CEO, this powerful man sitting at a table with my aunts and uncles trying kimchi for the first time, laughing and celebrating with us. He looked up at me and his eyes were wet. He saw me when no one else did. He gave me a chance when everyone else saw a name they couldn't pronounce and decided I wasn't worth their time. Everything I have, my career, my home, my ability to take care of my family, I owe to him. His voice hardened. When you played that recording at the wedding, when I heard how your parents manipulated him, pressured him when his mind was failing, used his illness against him, I knew what I had to do. This was for him, for his memory, for everything he believed in. He paused. And for you, because you're the only one in your family who has his integrity, his values, his spine. I stood up and walked around the desk. David tensed, uncertain. I did something I never did in professional settings, something that violated every boundary I'd carefully maintained. I hugged him. Brief, awkward, but genuine. Thank you, I said. When I stepped back, David nodded once. His professional mask was back in place, but something had shifted between us. We're going to destroy them legally, he said, thoroughly and completely. They're walking into a courtroom with a strategy based entirely on false intelligence. It's going to be spectacular. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting alone. 2 months after the board vote, my sister's carefully constructed life came apart in the pages of page 6. The photos were damning. Vanessa and Derek Santos, the wedding planner, she'd paid $150,000, leaving a boutique hotel in Soho at 2 in the afternoon. His hand on her back. Her looking up at him with an expression I'd never seen her direct at Bradley. The next photo caught them kissing in the lobby, then freezing when they spotted the photographer guilt written across both their faces. More photos surfaced over the following days. Vanessa and Derek at a restaurant in the West Village 6 months ago. At a bar in Tribeca during what should have been a wedding planning meeting. Text messages leaked to TMZ. Someone had sold them for $25,000, probably a friend who needed money more than loyalty. The messages were explicit detailing rendezvous during wedding preparations, mocking Bradley. One message from Vanessa read, "He's so clueless, keeps talking about the honeymoon while I'm planning tomorrow with you." Bradley filed for annulment 48 hours after the story broke. His lawyer released a terse statement. "The marriage was based on fraudulent pretenses and is hereby dissolved. Mr. Beaumont will have no further comment." Vanessa's Instagram became a battlefield. Her carefully curated feed of designer outfits and lifestyle content was flooded with comments. 30,000 followers disappeared in 3 days. The brand partnerships she'd spent years cultivating, the skincare companies, the fashion labels, the luxury hotels that had given her free stays in exchange for posts, all dropped her within a week. The woman who was supposed to become CEO had become a tabloid punchline, a cautionary tale about influencers and infidelity. But it got worse. Bradley's family, determined to ensure Vanessa received nothing in the annulment, hired a forensic accountant to examine the wedding expenses. What they found was interesting. The wedding budget had been $500,000. The accountant's report showed that only $350,000 had actually been spent on the venue, the flowers, the dress, the catering. The remaining $150,000 had been transferred by Vanessa to 3 different accounts over the past 2 years. One in the Cayman Islands, one in Switzerland, one in Singapore. She'd been embezzling from her own wedding fund, siphoning money her parents had given her into offshore accounts. The accountant's report suggested she'd been planning to use the money to fund a lifestyle brand once she became CEO, a business venture she'd apparently been developing in secret. The accountant sent his findings to the FBI. Wire fraud, financial fraud, possible money laundering. I learned about the investigation from a phone call on a Tuesday morning. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Financial Crimes Division. "Ms. Mitchell, we're investigating your sister for potential financial crimes. We understand you're not involved, but we may need your cooperation as we proceed." "I'll provide whatever you need," I said. "Thank you. We'll be in touch." I hung up and sat at my desk, staring out at the city. I should have felt something, satisfaction, vindication, maybe even pity. Instead, I felt nothing. Just the cold recognition that Vanessa had always been heading towards self-destruction. She'd been raised to believe she was entitled to everything, accountable for nothing. This was the inevitable result. My mother tried desperately to save her golden child. She hired Martin Rothstein, the best criminal defense attorney in New York, at $850 an hour. She paid for crisis management consultants. She called in every favor she had left, which weren't many after the company scandal. She gave an interview to a sympathetic journalist from a Connecticut lifestyle magazine, trying to control the narrative. "My youngest daughter made mistakes, but she's being crucified by the media, while my eldest daughter is praised for destroying our family. Where's the fairness in that?" She tried to spin Vanessa's affair as a cry for help, the embezzlement as a misunderstanding about budget management. "She was overwhelmed by family pressure," Patricia told the interviewer. "The wedding planning, the expectations, the company drama. She made poor choices, but they came from a place of stress and confusion, not malice." Nobody was buying it. The press had moved on from family drama to a simpler, more satisfying story. Spoiled rich girl commits fraud, gets caught, faces consequences. It was exactly the kind of morality tale people loved. Vanessa's lawyer negotiated with the FBI. In exchange for full cooperation, testimony about our parents' finances, their shell companies, their tax evasion schemes. Every financial irregularity she'd witnessed over the years, the FBI would recommend minimal charges for the wedding fund embezzlement. Probably probation community service restitution. Vanessa took the deal. My mother's attempts to protect her daughter had backfired spectacularly. Now both of her daughters were aligned against her and my father. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who'd spent decades dividing her daughters, playing them against each other, using one to diminish the other, had finally succeeded in uniting them, just not in the way she'd intended. I read about Vanessa's cooperation agreement in the Wall Street Journal over morning coffee. Sarah called me immediately. "Your sister just handed us a nuclear weapon," she said. "Her testimony will bury your parents." "I know. Are you okay with this?" I thought about it. Was I okay with my sister testifying against our parents to save herself? Was I okay with the fact that both of us had chosen self-preservation over family loyalty? "Yes," I said. "I'm okay with it." Her downfall was inevitable, but my father's rage was just beginning. I was alone in my office at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening, reviewing third-quarter projections on my laptop, when my office door crashed open. My father stood in the doorway, breathing hard. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 months. Unshaven, his hair unkempt, his suit wrinkled in a way I'd never seen. His eyes were wild, unfocused, the eyes of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "You've destroyed everything." His voice was raw, shaking with rage. I stood slowly, my hand moving instinctively toward the panic button installed under my desk. The building was mostly empty cleaning crew, on the lower floors a security guard in the lobby who was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of breach. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady. "Your mother is on antidepressants." He moved into the office and I could smell the alcohol on him. "Your sister's marriage is over. The FBI is investigating us. Our friends won't return our calls. Our attorneys are bleeding us dry. And for what? Your precious wounded pride. How did you get past security?" He laughed bitterly. $5,000. Everyone has a price, Caroline. Everyone can be bought. I thought I'd taught you that." I kept my hand near the panic button but didn't press it. Not yet. "Get out of my office." "Your office?" His voice rose. "This was supposed to be Vanessa's office. This whole company was supposed to be hers." For the first time in 36 years, my father told me the complete truth. "You were never supposed to be CEO." He said, his words tumbling out in a torrent of decades-old resentment. "The plan was always for you to be competent enough to maintain operations, to keep things running, and then step aside gracefully when Vanessa was ready. That was the deal your mother and I made before you were even born. First daughter, the workhorse. Second daughter, the legacy. You were supposed to know your place." The venom in his voice was ancient, carefully preserved, aged like fine wine. "But you had to be exceptional, didn't you? Had to work harder than everyone else had to prove yourself, had to make the board fall in love with you. You ruined everything by being too good at a job that was never meant for you." Something crystallized in my mind. "So you decided to take it from me by force, at my sister's wedding, in front of 200 people, to humiliate me into submission." "Yes," he was screaming now, his face purple, "because nothing else worked. We tried ignoring you, we tried dismissing your achievements, we tried minimizing everything you did. But you just kept going, kept succeeding, kept making yourself indispensable. You wouldn't stay in your lane." I pulled my hand away from the panic button. I didn't need security. I needed to finish this myself. I walked around my desk until I stood 3 feet from him. When I spoke, my voice was cold as winter. "I am not your employee anymore. I am not your daughter anymore. I am the CEO of grandfather's company, and you are a thief who stole from him when he was dying. You stole from 800 employees who trusted you. You have no power here. No authority, no say in anything that happens in this building." I stepped closer and he stepped back. "You thought you could control me my entire life. You thought if you withheld enough love, enough approval, enough acknowledgement, I'd break. I'd become small enough to fit in the box you'd built for me. My voice dropped. The truth is, you lost control of me the moment grandfather saw something in me you never did integrity. My father's face went from purple to red to white. I will destroy you. I will take everything from you. I'll spend every dollar I have left. I'll call in every favor. You already tried that, I said quietly. At my sister's wedding. In front of the entire industry. In front of senators and CEOs and every person whose opinion you've ever cared about. Remember how that turned out. I walked past him to my office door and opened it. Security was running down the hallway. Someone had heard the shouting, or maybe the guard my father had bribed had developed a conscience. Leave now, or I press charges for trespassing, bribing security personnel, and threatening a corporate officer. Your choice. 2 security guards reached my door. Both young men who looked uncertain about manhandling a 68-year-old man in an expensive suit. Escort Mr. Mitchell from the building, I said. He's not welcome here. As they each took one of his arms, my father looked back at me. His eyes were desperate, searching for something, fear maybe, or doubt, or some sign that he still had power over me. You're just like me, he said. Cold, calculating, ruthless. You think you're different, but you're exactly like me. I held his gaze. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, but I knew he heard every word. No, I'm exactly like grandfather. That's what terrifies you. The security guards led him away. I heard his voice echoing in the hallway, still shouting, but the words were incoherent now. I closed my office door and stood there for a long moment, my hand on the handle. For the first time, I'd seen real fear in his eyes, and he'd mistaken mine for weakness. The civil lawsuit had a trial date 6 months after my parents filed. Mitchell v. Mitchell would go before a jury in federal court, and whoever lost would lose everything: credibility, reputation, any chance of redemption. Sarah Chen expanded our legal team. 2 additional partners from Morrison & Associates joined specialists in defamation and corporate governance. 3 paralegals worked around the clock preparing exhibits and witness lists. We hired a jury consultant, a woman who'd helped select juries in some of the country's most high-profile cases. The cost climbed to $400,000. I paid it all from personal funds, watching my savings evaporate into legal fees. My parents had Thompson & Associates, 6 attorneys, all working on contingency plus expenses, burning through what remained of my parents' savings. They'd already spent over $300,000 and we hadn't even reached trial. The discovery phase was brutal. Both sides subpoenaed everything. I had to turn over every personal email from the past 5 years, every text message, my complete dating history. They demanded my therapy records. I'd seen a therapist twice in 2019 for work-related stress after a particularly difficult merger. 2 sessions, but they'd use it to paint me as unstable. They subpoenaed employee reviews I'd written looking for evidence of vindictiveness. Former boyfriends were contacted. College friends were interviewed. Every aspect of my life was examined under a microscope and photographed for evidence. Sarah sat across from me in my office one evening, surrounded by bankers' boxes full of discovery materials. They're going to paint you as vindictive, unstable, obsessed with revenge, she said bluntly. They'll say you couldn't handle being ignored by your family, so you weaponized corporate procedures to destroy them. They'll say this is about your ego, not justice. Are you ready for them to systematically tear apart your character in front of a jury? I looked at her steadily. They've been tearing apart my character my whole life, Sarah. At least now there are rules. 2 weeks before trial, the character assassination began in earnest. Sources close to the family, my parents' lawyers, obviously started leaking stories to friendly media outlets. The Connecticut Post ran a piece, Caroline Mitchell, A Portrait of Isolation. Anonymous sources described me as troubled, unable to maintain relationships, obsessed with proving myself to a family that had always loved her, but couldn't reach her through her walls of ambition. They dug up my college hospitalization. I'd been admitted for 48 hours during finals week my junior year, diagnosed with exhaustion and dehydration. I was 20 years old working 3 jobs while carrying a full course load. But the headline read, Mitchell CEO's History of Mental Health Crisis. Ex-boyfriends were found and interviewed. James, the lawyer I'd dated 4 years ago, told a reporter I'd been difficult to connect with and married to my work. He wasn't wrong, but the context made me sound pathological rather than dedicated. Former employees I'd fired for cause, people who'd falsified expense reports or sexually harassed colleagues, were presented as victims of my vindictive nature. One man I'd terminated for repeatedly showing up drunk claimed I'd had a personal vendetta against him. None of it was illegal. It was just strategic character destruction, and it was working. My PR team pushed back with facts. My successful 3-year tenure as CEO. Employee satisfaction scores that had climbed from 62% to 91% under my leadership. Revenue growth. Client retention. Awards from industry publications. But facts were boring compared to the drama of a lonely, possibly unstable CEO destroying her family out of spite. A poll conducted the week before trial showed public opinion split exactly down the middle. 50% viewed me as a hero exposing corruption. 50% viewed me as a villain using corporate warfare to settle family scores. Sarah advised against it, but I made a decision. I agreed to a 60 minutes interview scheduled to air 3 days before trial. Leslie Stahl met me in a studio in Manhattan, her legendary journalistic instincts honed over decades. She asked the hard questions. Did you plan this confrontation at your sister's wedding? Yes. That's quite calculated, isn't it? Yes. They were planning to humiliate me publicly to announce my forced resignation in front of 200 witnesses. I chose to confront them publicly, but with evidence and truth, rather than manipulation. Some people say this is vindictive, that you destroyed your family out of revenge. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Some people confuse justice with vengeance. If a stranger embezzled from a company and manipulated an elderly man's will, we'd call that criminal. We'd demand accountability. Why should it be different when family does it? Why should blood excuse fraud? Do you regret destroying your family? For the first time in the interview, I let emotion show. Not manufactured emotion, real grief that I'd been holding back for months. I regret that I had to, I said quietly. I grieve for the family I wish I'd had. For parents who could have loved me without needing to control me. For a sister who could have been my friend instead of my rival. But I don't regret telling the truth. I don't regret protecting my grandfather's legacy and the jobs of 800 people. The interview aired on Sunday night to 12 million viewers. I watched it alone in my apartment, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside me. When it was over, I turned off the television and sat in silence. The next morning, the poll numbers had shifted. 64% of respondents now supported me. The truth told calmly and with evident pain had cut through the spin. Sarah called at 8 a.m. That interview may have just won us the trial before we even start. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it just means more people will be watching when we fail. The courtroom would be our final battlefield. Only one side would walk away. The trial began on a Monday morning in the Federal Courthouse, Southern District of New York. Sarah had successfully moved the case from Connecticut, arguing that the corporate governance claims were tied to a New York-based company and that my parents' Connecticut connections created an unfair advantage. Judge Patricia Huang presided 55-years-old federal appointment known for running efficient trials with zero tolerance for theatrics. The courtroom gallery was packed. I counted reporters from 20 different outlets, business observers scribbling notes, company employees who'd taken personal days to attend sitting in the back rows, random members of the public who'd won seats through the court's lottery system, curious to witness a family civil war. I sat at the defendant's table wearing a charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back in a simple twist, minimal jewelry. Professional, composed, unremarkable. Sarah sat to my right, her paralegal to my left, organizing exhibits in numbered binders. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their 6 Thompson and Associates attorneys. My mother wore dark blue dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. My father wore black, looking appropriately somber and aged. They'd dressed for sympathy. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise!" Judge Huang entered her black robe crisp, her expression unreadable. We stood then, sat at her direction. "This is Mitchell v. Mitchell case number 24 CV 6847, she said. "We'll begin with opening statements. Mr. Thompson, you may proceed." James Thompson stood. 62 years old, silver hair, perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was charging my parents $1,200 an hour, and within the first 30 seconds, I understood why. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about a daughter who weaponized family tragedy for corporate gain." His voice was warm, confident, commanding without being aggressive. He moved toward the jury box as he spoke, making eye contact with each juror. "Caroline Mitchell is ambitious. She's intelligent. She's ruthless in business. These aren't criticisms, they're facts she'd probably acknowledge herself. But when that ambition, that ruthlessness, turned against her own family, it became something else entirely. It became a calculated campaign of public humiliation designed to destroy her parents and steal a company they'd devoted their lives to building. He presented the wedding confrontation as premeditated cruelty. She didn't go to authorities. She didn't use proper corporate channels. She didn't attempt mediation or family counseling. Instead, she chose the most painful public venue possible, her sister's wedding day, in front of 200 guests. She staged a theatrical ambush designed to inflict maximum emotional damage while positioning herself as the victim. He attacked the recording, my grandfather's voice, that had been so powerful at the wedding. This recording, which surfaced conveniently exactly when Ms. Mitchell needed it, was authenticated by experts she hired and paid. Experts who had every incentive to tell her what she wanted to hear. The recording is allegedly from 2009, but Ms. Mitchell claims she only found it months ago. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? He suggested the will analysis was merely interpretation, not proven fact. Document experts looked at signatures and made educated guesses about duress. But James Mitchell was 87 years old, terminally ill. Of course, his signature was shakier than it had been years before. That's what happens when you're dying. It doesn't prove manipulation. It proves mortality. Then came the character witnesses. My ex-boyfriend James took the stand looking uncomfortable in a suit. Thompson asked gentle leading questions. "In your relationship with Ms. Mitchell, did she prioritize work over personal connection?" "Yes, always. She'd cancel plans for meetings, miss important events because of work. I don't think she knew how to be present with another person." A former employee I'd fired for cause, a man who'd been verbally abusive to subordinates, testified that I'd fired him for questioning my decisions, rather than for documented misconduct. Thompson made it sound like I couldn't tolerate dissent. A college friend I hadn't spoken to in years mentioned my hospitalization during finals week, making it sound ominous rather than what it was, a 20-year-old student pushing herself too hard. By the time Thompson finished his opening statement, he'd painted a portrait of a cold, calculating woman obsessed with revenge, willing to destroy her family's reputation to satisfy her ego. I watched the jury. 3 of them were nodding. 2 looked sympathetic to my parents. Sarah's face was tight, her jaw clenched. This was worse than we'd expected. That night, our legal team gathered at Morrison & Associates. The conference room was littered with coffee cups and legal pads covered in notes. Sarah was blunt. "If they convince the jury that the recording is questionable and that your primary motivation was revenge rather than protecting the company, we could lose. Not on all counts, the evidence of financial fraud is too strong, but enough to damage your credibility permanently. Thompson is better than I expected. He's making you look like the aggressor." David Park had been sitting in the gallery all day. He spoke up now. "What about the FBI investigation into her parents? Can't we mention that?" Sarah shook her head. "It's an ongoing investigation. Judge won't allow it too prejudicial, and it hasn't resulted in charges yet. We reviewed strategy until 2 a.m. Every argument Thompson had made, every witness he'd called, every doubt he'd planted. We prepared our responses, refined our witness list, adjusted our approach. When I finally got back to my apartment at 3 a.m., I was too wired to sleep. I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Manhattan, at the lights that never went dark, at the city that kept moving regardless of individual human drama. I'd spent $500,000 on legal fees, 6 months of character assassination. My family was destroyed, my sister's marriage annulled, my parents facing federal investigation. And I might still lose this trial. I might walk away with my reputation in tatters, publicly branded as a vindictive daughter who'd weaponized corporate procedures for personal revenge. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass and barely recognized the woman staring back. Was I the hero? The villain? Had I been right to do what I did, or had I let 36 years of resentment turn me into exactly what Thompson claimed, someone who'd confused justice with vengeance? At 4 a.m., I finally collapsed on my couch, still wearing my suit, too exhausted to change clothes or move to my bed. And then our lawyers stood up with the evidence they never saw coming. Day 4 of the trial. Sarah Chen stood and addressed Judge Huang. "Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Sarah Chen." A woman in her late 30s entered the courtroom, professional, confident, Southeast Asian, carrying a leather folder. My parents' lawyers leaned together, whispering. This name hadn't been on our original witness list. James Thompson was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this witness wasn't disclosed in accordance with discovery rules," Sarah responded smoothly. "Your Honor, Dr. Chen only became available yesterday due to a scheduling conflict with another federal case. We filed notice first thing this morning in compliance with Rule 26's provisions for late disclosed witnesses." Judge Huang reviewed the filing on her tablet. "The notice was timely. I'll allow it. Proceed." Dr. Chen took the stand, was sworn in, and sat with the composure of someone who'd done this dozens of times. "Please state your credentials for the court," Sarah said. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, forensic audio specialist. Ph.D. from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science with specialization in digital signal processing. I've been analyzing audio recordings for authenticity for 15 years. I've testified in 47 federal cases, including 3 that reached the Supreme Court." "And did you analyze the recording at issue in this case?" "Yes, I did." "Please describe your methodology." Dr. Chen opened her folder, pulling out detailed reports. "I spent 200 hours analyzing the recording using multiple techniques. Spectral analysis to examine frequency patterns, magnetic tape degradation analysis to determine age, background noise signatures to verify environmental consistency, voice stress analysis to detect any manipulation of the speaker's vocal patterns." "What was your conclusion?" "The recording is 100% authentic and unaltered. Based on magnetic tape degradation patterns and oxide layer analysis, it was recorded in November 2009, no splicing detected. No digital manipulation, no AI generation markers. This is a genuine recording of James Mitchell made on analog equipment in 2009. Thompson objected. "Your Honor, this witness is analyzing a tape provided by the defendant. Chain of custody is suspect." Dr. Chen didn't wait for Sarah to respond. "I analyzed the original cassette tape retrieved from First National Bank safety deposit box number 247, accessed legally through estate documents. I examined the physical tape itself, not a copy. I documented the chain of custody from the moment the box was opened. It's unbreakable." I watched the jury. Several were leaning forward now, interested. The accountant in the second row was taking detailed notes. Sarah's next witness was even more devastating. The defense calls Michael Torres. A man in his mid-40s entered wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase that looked like it weighed 20 pounds. FBI senior forensic accountant. Sarah had fought for weeks to get him. The FBI initially refused, citing their ongoing investigation, but Judge Huang had ordered cooperation since his testimony was directly relevant to our fraud claims. Torres took the stand with the unflappable demeanor of someone who'd spent 30 years following money trails. Mr. Torres, please describe your analysis of Mitchell & Associates' financial records. He opened his briefcase and pulled out bound reports. I analyzed 5 years of corporate financial records, bank statements, wire transfers, and credit card statements. I identified $187,000 in fraudulent transfers made by Robert and Patricia Mitchell. He walked the jury through each transaction methodically. The shell company Beaumont Advisory received $23,000 from Mitchell & Associates for consulting services. However, this company has no employees, no office, no website, no tax filings showing revenue from any other source. The company's registered address is Bradley Beaumont Sr.'s home address. The $23,000 was transferred into Beaumont Advisory's account, and then within 48 hours transferred to Robert and Patricia Mitchell's personal checking account. He continued through every fraudulent transaction. The Tuscany vacation charged as business development, the wire transfers to Delaware shell corporations, the unauthorized bonuses. The jury was riveting. The accountant was nodding with recognition. She knew exactly what she was seeing. In your professional opinion, what are these transactions? This isn't accounting error. This is wire fraud. This is embezzlement. This is systematic theft from a company where the defendants held positions of fiduciary trust. Thompson tried to recover on cross-examination. Isn't it possible these were legitimate business expenses that were simply miscategorized? Torres looked at him directly. No. I reviewed every invoice, every contract, every service agreement for the past 5 years. These payments have no corresponding services, no deliverables, no business justification whatsoever. In 30 years of forensic accounting, including 15 years in the IRS Criminal Division, I have never seen legitimate business expenses look like this. Thompson had no follow-up. He sat down. Our final witness was Dr. Robert Weinstein, 68 years old, a probate attorney who'd testified in some of the country's most famous will contests. He presented side-by-side signature analysis showing my grandfather's steady hand in 2008 compared to the shaking, barely legible signature on the 2010 will. James Mitchell was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease in October 2009, Dr. Weinstein testified. His physician noted that the patient was easily confused, susceptible to suggestion showing signs of decreased executive function. The revised will was executed in February 2010, 4 months into this diagnosis. He presented the timeline. The original attorney Harold Brennan, who had represented Mr. Mitchell for 30 years, was suddenly replaced with Martin Weiss. Mr. Weiss received a $50,000 payment from Robert and Patricia Mitchell the same month the new will was executed. The witnesses on the new will were both paralegals from Mr. Weiss's office, not independent parties. Thompson objected again. The will was properly executed and legally filed. Dr. Weinstein remained calm. Legal form and ethical substance are different things, Mr. Thompson. This will shows every classic marker of undue influence. Vulnerable testator. Sudden change from a long-time trusted attorney. Financial incentive to the new attorney. Dramatic departure from prior testamentary wishes. Physical evidence of duress in the signature itself. In my professional opinion, based on 40 years of experience, this will was procured through exploitation of a dying man's diminished mental capacity. The courtroom was silent when he finished. Their empire collapsed in 3 witnesses and 2 hours of testimony. Closing arguments finished on day 6. Sarah's was clinical devastating in its precision. This isn't about family drama, she told the jury. This is about fraud, theft, and exploitation of an elderly man when he was most vulnerable. The plaintiffs have spent a week trying to make this about Caroline Mitchell's character, her ambition, her work habits, her personal life. But character doesn't change facts. And the facts are clear. $187,000 in documented fraud, a will procured through undue influence of a man with diagnosed dementia, a recording authenticated by one of the country's foremost forensic specialists. These are facts, not interpretations. The jury began deliberating at 2 p.m. 3 hours became 4. 4 became 5. Sarah and I sat in a private conference room in the courthouse surrounded by empty coffee cups and legal pads covered in nervous doodles. Long deliberation could mean they're split, Sarah said quietly. That's not necessarily good for us. I couldn't eat. I tried drinking water, but my stomach rejected even that. David Park had taken a seat in the corner, not saying anything, just being present. At hour 5, my phone buzzed. Jury has reached a verdict. My hands were shaking as I stood. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. Whatever happens, you told the truth. That matters. We walked back to the courtroom in silence. The gallery was packed again. Same reporters, same observers, same company employees who'd been following every day of testimony. But the energy was different now. Tense. Electric. Everyone knew this was the end one way or another. Judge Huang entered. We stood, then sat. The jury filed in 12 faces, carefully neutral, professionally unreadable. I studied them desperately, looking for signs. The accountant in the second row, Juror 7, wouldn't make eye contact with my parents' table. That had to be good. But the retired teacher, Juror 3, looked sympathetic, almost sad. That seemed bad. Judge Huang spoke. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood a 55-year-old civil engineer named Marcus Williams. We have your honor. On the count of defamation, how do you find? We find for the defendant, Caroline Mitchell. My breath caught in my chest. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, for the defendant. Conspiracy to commit fraud, for the defendant. Unauthorized access to confidential information, for the defendant. Breach of fiduciary duty, for the defendant. Every count, every single claim my parents had made, rejected. But Marcus Williams wasn't finished. Furthermore, Your Honor, the jury wishes to note for the record that we find the plaintiff's claims were frivolous and brought in bad faith. We unanimously recommend the court consider imposing sanctions. Judge Huang nodded gravely. The court will take that recommendation under advisement. She lifted her gavel. This case is dismissed with prejudice. All claims against defendant Caroline Mitchell are hereby denied in their entirety. She paused, reviewing a document. The court further orders plaintiffs Robert and Patricia Mitchell to pay defendants' legal costs in the amount of $547,000. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. My parents' attorneys were already gathering their materials, faces tight. Sarah was hugging me, saying something I couldn't quite hear through the ringing in my ears. Outside in the hallway, chaos descended. Microphones thrust toward my face. Cameras flashing, questions shouted from every direction. Caroline, how do you feel? Ms. Mitchell, what's next for you? Will you reconcile with your family? Sarah guided me to a clear space. I made a brief statement, my voice steadier than I felt. This was never about revenge. It was about accountability. My grandfather built something good, something honest, and it was corrupted by people who should have protected it. Today, justice was served. I hope we can all move forward now. I didn't mention my parents by name. I didn't have to. Everyone knew. As we walked toward the elevator, I saw them, my parents sitting on a bench in the hallway. My mother was collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands. My father sat rigid beside her, staring at nothing, his face gray. Their attorneys were already distancing themselves. This loss would damage their firm's reputation, and they were cutting their losses. For a moment, something cracked in my chest. Not regret for what I'd done, not doubt about the rightness of exposing their fraud, but grief for something I'd never actually had. Grief for the parents I'd wished for as a child, for the family that could have been, but never was. The elevator doors opened. Sarah guided me inside. As the doors began to close, I saw my mother look up, her eyes finding mine across the hallway. I don't know what she saw in my expression. I don't know what I saw in hers. Then the doors closed. Sarah and David were talking, making plans, discussing next steps. I leaned against the elevator wall, closed my eyes, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for 7 days of trial. I'd won. Complete victory. The company was safe. The truth was public record. My grandfather's legacy was protected. 800 employees could keep their jobs without wondering if their leadership was corrupt. But I'd also orphaned myself. I had no parents now, not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. No sister, no family gatherings, no one to call on holidays. Just truth and justice and a hollowness in my chest I hadn't expected. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. More reporters waited. Sarah had called for a car. We pushed through the crowd and I climbed into the back seat. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I looked back at the building. Somewhere inside, my parents were facing the wreckage of everything they'd built through lies and manipulation. I'd won the battle. But the war wasn't over. 1 week after the verdict, I was in my office at 6 p.m., reviewing the restructuring plan for the board's oversight committee. My assistant had left at 5. The building was quiet, winding down for the evening. A knock on my door. "Come in." It was my mother. I hadn't seen her since that moment in the courthouse hallway. Her face collapsed in grief as the elevator doors closed between us. The woman who entered my office looked like she'd aged 20 years in 7 days. Her hair was gray, no longer colored. No makeup. She wore an old cardigan over plain slacks, clothing I'd never seen her in, so different from the designer outfits that had been her uniform for as long as I could remember. Her hands shook as she closed the door behind her. "Please," she said, "I need to talk to you." My first instinct was to call security. My hand moved toward the phone. But something in her face stopped me. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't performance. This was defeat, complete and total. "Sit." She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where clients sat, where shareholders sat during meetings. She was no longer family. She was a visitor in a space where I held all the power. Her voice when she spoke was hollow, emptied of all the careful modulation I'd heard my entire life. "I need to tell you something I should have told you 30 years ago." She looked down at her hands. "I was the eldest daughter, too." I went completely still. "My parents, your grandparents on my side, they had 2 daughters. Me and your Aunt Jennifer. I was the responsible one. Straight A's through high school. Full scholarship to Wellesley. I worked 2 jobs to pay for everything they didn't cover. Jennifer was the beauty, the charmer. She barely graduated high school, but everyone loved her. She had that quality people couldn't resist." Patricia's hands twisted in her lap, wringing an invisible cloth. "When our parents died, I was 32. I'd been sending them money every month, helping pay their medical bills, visiting every weekend. Jennifer had moved to California, called twice a year. When the will was read, they'd left everything to her. The house, the savings, the family jewelry, everything. I got $5,000 and a note that said, 'You're successful enough already. Your sister needs this more than you do.' I said nothing, just watched her. I swore I would never do that to my daughters. I swore I'd give you both everything equally fairly, that you'd never feel what I felt, that being competent meant being disposable." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "But when we had money, real money, after your father and I built our investments, I became terrified of losing it. And your sister, she was easy to manage, compliant. Give her things, she'd be happy. Praise her, she'd do what we wanted. But you," her voice cracked, "you were strong, independent. From the time you were 8 years old, you didn't need us. You did your homework without being asked. You got yourself to school activities. You built your own life. And that terrified me. Because if you didn't need us, how could we control you? And if we couldn't control you, what if you took everything? What if you became so powerful you pushed us aside?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "So I convinced myself that you were strong enough to handle less, that you'd succeed anyway because you were so capable, that Vanessa needed our protection and you didn't. But the truth is, I became my mother. The exact woman who hurt me, who I swore I'd never be. I looked at you and saw myself the daughter who worked for love and never got it. And instead of breaking that cycle, I perpetuated it. I created it again. She was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. I destroyed both my daughters. I neglected you and suffocated her. We're both victims of my fear, my weakness, my inability to be better than the woman who raised me. I don't expect forgiveness. I can't undo 36 years of damage. But I needed you to know. I see it now. I see what I did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The office was silent, except for her crying. I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, raised me, shaped me through absence more than presence, betrayed me, and realized something profound. I finally understood her. Understanding didn't mean forgiveness. My voice when I spoke was quiet but firm. Thank you for telling me. It helps me understand the pattern, the why behind the what. She looked up, something like hope flickering in her eyes. But it doesn't change anything. The hope died. I know you suffered too, I continued. And I'm genuinely sorry your mother failed you the way you failed me. That's real pain and I don't diminish it. But you made choices, Mom. Every single day for 36 years you made choices. Understanding why you made them doesn't erase their consequences. Can we ever? She started. No. The word hung in the air between us. Final. Irrevocable. I hope you find peace, I said, and I meant it. I hope you get therapy. I hope you work on yourself, process your own trauma, find some kind of contentment in whatever life you build next. But you won't find it with me. I've spent my entire life seeking your approval, trying to earn love that was never going to be given freely. I'm done. I stood. The meeting was over. Goodbye, Mom. She stood slowly, unsteadily. For a moment, she looked like she might say something else, might make one more plea. But she didn't. She just nodded, picked up her purse, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. You deserved better, she whispered. Yes, I said. I did. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood in my office alone and looked at the woman who had given birth to me and realized I'd never really known her at all. 2 weeks after the civil verdict, federal prosecutors formally charged my parents with wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. The U.S. Attorney's Office held a press conference announcing the indictment with the kind of language usually reserved for organized crime cases. The evidence was overwhelming. The civil trial had already exposed everything publicly, and now the government was pursuing criminal penalties. My parents faced 10 to 15 years each if convicted. Their attorneys immediately began negotiating. They offered full restitution to the company and admission of guilt in exchange for reduced sentences. But the prosecutors wanted more. They wanted testimony about the full extent of the scheme's offshore accounts. Unreported income, the complete web of financial fraud they suspected went deeper than what we'd uncovered. They needed an insider, someone who'd been close enough to witness everything but who could be leveraged into cooperation. They approached Vanessa. Her attorney, a different one now, a criminal defense specialist, negotiated for 3 days. Full immunity on the wedding fund embezzlement, which would have carried a minimum 2 to 3 year sentence. Complete protection from any charges related to her parents' schemes. In exchange, total cooperation, testimony, documents, everything she knew. Vanessa took the deal. During the evidence-gathering phase, FBI agents executed a search warrant on the Connecticut estate. They seized financial records, computers, safe deposit box keys. Among the items logged into evidence were 5 journals belonging to Vanessa spanning from age 16 to 28. As a cooperating witness for the prosecution, I was shown relevant excerpts pages that might contain information about family finances or discussions of illegal activity. What I found instead was something I hadn't expected. Age 16. I wish I could be invisible like Caroline. She gets to do what she wants. I have to wear what Mom approves, date, who Dad introduces, study, What they choose. I'm not a daughter. I'm a show dog. Age 19. Got accepted to Rhode Island School of Design today. Full scholarship for their illustration program. I've wanted this since I was 12. Dad said absolutely not. Business school or nothing. Why can't I just be free like my sister, age 24? They arranged for me to meet Bradley again, third time this year. He's nice enough, but I feel like a prize being awarded to the highest bidder. Caroline chose her own life, chose her own career, chose everything. I've never chosen anything. I read page after page, seeing my sister's life through entirely new eyes. The golden child had been golden caged. While I'd been neglected, she'd been suffocated. Different forms of the same abuse. The day of Vanessa's deposition, I arrived at the federal building early. I wasn't required to be there. My testimony had already been given, but something pulled me. I found her in a hallway outside the conference room, sitting alone on a bench. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, no jewelry. She looked small in a way I'd never seen before. Not physically small, she'd always been smaller than me, but diminished. Like someone who'd finally realized the costume they'd been wearing was someone else's. She saw me and stood uncertain. We looked at each other across 10 feet of marble hallway. Long silence. Finally, Vanessa spoke. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't deserve it. But, thank you. I raised my eyebrows. For what? For being strong enough to break the cycle. For showing me that the cage had a door. Her voice cracked. I never could have done what you did. Never had the courage to stand up to them, to risk losing their approval. You freed both of us. She took a shaky breath. They're my parents, and I'm about to send them to prison. But you're right, it's the only way this ends. For both of us. I studied her, really looked at her for the first time in years. Not as the spoiled golden child, not as the rival who'd been chosen over me, but as another person who'd been damaged by the same people in different ways. I read your journals, I said. I didn't know. She nodded. How could you? I barely knew myself. I was so busy playing the role they'd written for me that I forgot there could be other roles. We both deserved better. Yes. We stood there in that hallway, two sisters who'd been pitted against each other for 3 decades, finally seeing each other clearly. I didn't hug her, didn't offer my phone number or suggest we meet for coffee someday, but I nodded. Good luck in there. Thank you. Vanessa gave her testimony that afternoon. 5 hours of detailed, devastating information. She provided account numbers for offshore accounts our parents had hidden from the IRS. She detailed conversations about tax evasion strategies. She described meetings with attorneys about shell corporations. She buried our parents with the kind of insider knowledge only a daughter could provide. When she walked out of the federal building that evening, she was surrounded by reporters' cameras flashing. I watched from a window upstairs as she pushed through the crowd without speaking, got into a waiting car, and disappeared. I heard later that she'd moved to California. Changed her name legally, started over. Someone told me she was working at an art gallery in Los Angeles, that she'd started painting again. We never spoke after that day in the hallway. Never called, never wrote, never tried to rebuild what had never really existed in the first place. But I understood now. We were both victims who'd made different choices when the cage door finally opened. She'd chosen survival through compliance, then cooperation. I'd chosen confrontation. Neither choice was wrong. They were just different paths out of the same prison. Blood meant nothing when greed ruled. But truth meant everything. 6 months after the civil verdict, my parents stood for sentencing in federal court. They'd already pled guilty as part of a negotiated deal. The prosecution had recommended 8 years instead of the potential 15, given their age and agreement to pay full restitution. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years on the bench, read the sentence without emotion. You betrayed not just your daughter, but your father's memory, your employees, and the public trust. This court sentences each of you to 8 years in federal prison to be served concurrently, followed by 3 years supervised release. You will pay full restitution of $187,000 plus interest and a fine of $250,000 each. I sat in the gallery 3 rows back. The prosecution hadn't asked me to give a victim impact statement, and I'd declined to request one. I had nothing left to say to them that hadn't already been said. As the marshals approached to take them into custody, my father kept his eyes forward. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. But my mother turned. Our eyes met across the courtroom. She mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." I nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. As they disappeared through the door that led to the holding cells, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not vindication, just release. It was over. Finally, completely over. 2 weeks later, I called an all-company meeting. All 800 employees gathered in the main facility, the factory floor where my grandfather had walked during his first years building this company. I stood on a small platform with a microphone, no notes, no script. 6 months ago, I stood in a ballroom and exposed corruption in this company. Today, I stand here to tell you what we're building instead. I unveiled the new initiatives I'd been developing with the restructured board. First, full financial transparency. Every quarter, detailed financial reports will be available to every employee, not just shareholders, but everyone who works here. You deserve to know how your work translates to company health, where the money goes, how decisions are made. People were listening intently, some nodding. Second, an anonymous reporting system. If you see something wrong, if you witness harassment or fraud or anything that violates our values, you can report it without fear of retaliation. Third-party administration completely protected. The room was silent, attentive. Third, profit sharing. Starting next quarter, 15% of net profits will be distributed to all employees based on tenure and performance. This is your company too. You should share in its success. The room erupted in applause, people standing, some wiping their eyes. I continued over the noise. And we're establishing the James Mitchell Legacy Fund. $5 million annually for employee education, community investment, and ethical business practices. My grandfather believed business should serve people, not the other way around. We're going to prove he was right. After the meeting, people lined up to shake my hand. Line workers, executives, warehouse staff, administrative assistants. Manuel Rodriguez, a 60-year-old factory worker who'd been with the company for 40 years, grabbed my hand with both of his. I worked for your grandfather for 20 years before he passed, mija. He'd be so proud of you. My eyes stung. Thank you, Manuel. 3 weeks later, I did a live interview with CNN. Anderson Cooper asked the questions everyone wanted answered. Some people say you destroyed your family. How do you respond to that? I'd say my family destroyed itself through fraud and betrayal. I just refused to be complicit in it. Do you have any regrets? I regret that it was necessary. I wish I'd had a family that valued integrity over control, that could love without needing to dominate. But I don't regret fighting for what was right. Do you forgive your parents? I paused, choosing my words carefully. This was the question I'd been asking myself for months. I'm working on it. Not for them, they haven't asked for forgiveness in any meaningful way beyond my mother's single apology. But for myself. Because holding on to anger only poisons me, not them. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means releasing myself from the weight of their choices. What's next for you? Continuing my grandfather's work. Building a company that does well by doing good. Creating a model other businesses can follow. And hopefully inspiring other people who feel trapped by family dysfunction to know you can choose integrity over loyalty. You can break cycles. You can build something better. The interview was viewed by 8 million people. Social media exploded with responses overwhelmingly positive this time. The hashtag Team Caroline trended again, but the tone was different. This is what real leadership looks like. She chose truth over comfort. That's courage. Every CEO should watch this. Forbes called 2 days later requesting a cover story, "The CEO who chose integrity." I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, successful beyond measure. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd won everything. The company was mine, restructured and ethical. My reputation was restored. My grandfather's legacy was protected. Justice had been served. I was being held up as an example of principled leadership. But I'd lost myself somewhere in the process. The woman who'd started this fight had wanted justice and family. The woman who'd emerged wanted only justice and had learned to live without family. I'd become harder, colder, more isolated. I had no parents, no sister, no family gatherings to dread or anticipate. Just success and solitude. I'd won everything. But had I lost myself? 2 years later, I sat in my corner office at sunset watching the city turn gold under the fading light. The company had flourished. Stock up 40%. Employee satisfaction at 94%, the highest in our industry. We'd opened 3 major expansions, including a facility in Ohio that brought 200 jobs to a town that had been hemorrhaging employment for a decade. Fortune had named me one of their most influential CEOs. Bloomberg put me on their top 50 business leaders under 40 list. I was 38 years old. Successful by every measure that mattered in business. The board loved me. The employees trusted me. The industry respected me. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt contemplative, almost melancholy. I'd gone on a few dates over the past year. Nice men, successful, interesting. Nothing stuck. I had friends now, real ones, not just professional connections. But they were careful around me, like I might shatter if they pushed too hard. I wasn't fragile, I was just different than I'd been. Harder, more guarded, more alone. I looked at the photo on my desk. My grandfather in 1985 standing in front of the original factory, his sleeves rolled up, grinning at the camera. Would he recognize the woman I'd become? I opened my bottom desk drawer, a ritual I'd developed. Inside was the leather box of his belongings, the cassette tape, the original will, old photos. I lifted it out, held it in my hands, this box that had changed everything. I ran my fingers along the velvet lining inside, and something felt wrong, too thick. I remembered noticing this 2 years ago, the night I'd found the tape, but I'd been too overwhelmed to investigate. Tonight, curiosity won. I carefully lifted the velvet lining. Underneath, pressed flat against the bottom of the box, was an envelope, yellowed with age, my name written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Caroline, open when you've won. The date, March 2010, 1 month before he died. My hands trembled as I opened it. 2 pages, handwritten, his script growing shakier toward the end. My dearest girl, if you're reading this, you've won. Not just the company, not just justice, but yourself. I knew this day would come. I saw it 10 years ago at your sister's 18th birthday party. Do you remember? Your parents gave her a Mercedes red with a bow. They gave you a card with $500. Everyone cheered for her. No one noticed you leave the party early. But I noticed. I followed you outside. You were sitting on the porch steps, not crying, just absorbing it. You looked up at me and said, "It's okay, Grandpa. I don't need a car. I'll buy my own someday." And you smiled. That moment I knew they would try to break you and you would survive it. So I started preparing. My breath caught. I'd forgotten that moment entirely, but reading his words brought it back with perfect clarity. I spent the next 10 years building you weapons. The company bylaws, I rewrote the emergency provisions, I made sure those were airtight. The shareholders, I stayed close to Richard, Helen, Marcus. I told each of them separately to watch out for you if anything happened to me. The will I had Harold draft, I made sure there were copies in 3 separate places. And when I felt my mind starting to go, when I knew they would use my illness against me, I recorded that tape. I documented everything. I left you a roadmap. Tears were already blurring my vision. But here's what I need you to understand. I didn't do this to make you fight. I did it to give you the choice to fight if you wanted to. You could have walked away, taken your 20%, started over somewhere else, built your own empire. No one would have blamed you. The fact that you're reading this means you chose differently. You chose to fight for what was right, not what was easy. You chose integrity over peace. That's not something I taught you. That's who you are. I had to stop reading my chest too tight to breathe properly. You think you're alone, but you never were. Every late night you worked, I was proud. Every sacrifice you made, I saw. Every time they diminished you, I raged. But I also saw you grow stronger. I'm sorry I couldn't fight this battle for you. But perhaps that was necessary. You needed to learn. You didn't need anyone to save you. You saved yourself. The letter continued. By now you've probably won the company. Maybe you've won in court. Maybe you've even won in the court of public opinion. But I want you to win one more thing yourself. Don't let this fight make you hard. Don't let their cruelty make you cruel. Don't become what you had to fight. Remember, you fought for something good. For employees who need jobs. For a legacy of integrity. For the principle that truth matters. That was never about revenge. That was about love. Love for something bigger than yourself. My tears fell freely now, spotting the old paper. I won't be there to see who you become after this. But I know this: you are everything I hoped you'd be. Strong, just, unbreakable. You are my legacy not because you run my company, but because you embody my values. The company is yours, not because I gave it to you, but because you earned it every single day. I love you. I see you. I always have. You were never alone. Grandfather James. I sat in my darkening office crying for the first time in 2 years. Not tears of grief or even joy. Tears of recognition. Of being seen, truly seen by someone who'd loved me without conditions or demands. He'd known this would happen. He'd prepared me for it. He'd given me the tools, and then trusted me to use them. I thought about my mother's confession. I became the person I swore I'd never be. But I'd made a different choice. I'd broken the cycle. I looked at my reflection in the window. Successful, scarred, whole. I wasn't sure I liked who I'd become: harder, lonelier, more isolated. But I was free. I was honest. I was myself. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Tomorrow I'd frame it. Tonight I picked up my phone and texted my 3 real friends. Dinner this weekend? My treat. I have something to celebrate. I wasn't sure what exactly. Maybe just survival, growth, truth. I gathered my things and turned off the office light. As I walked to the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. For the first time in 2 years, I smiled at myself. Not strategically, not performatively, just a real smile. Small, tired, but genuine. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. Tomorrow I'd keep building. Tonight I'd rest. The war was over. I'd won. Not just the company, not just justice, myself. Was this justice? Or was it love, the kind that transcends death itself? Perhaps it was both. And perhaps finally that was enough. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with Caroline's story until the very end. This wasn't just a story about corporate revenge or family betrayal. It was about something deeper, about finding the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. It was about breaking cycles of abuse that have been passed down through generations. And most importantly, it was about discovering that the love that matters most isn't the love that controls you, but the love that sets you free. Caroline's grandfather saw her. He believed in her. And even after death, he gave her the tools to save herself. That's the kind of legacy worth fighting for. Not money, not power, but integrity. Truth and the courage to choose what's right over what's comfortable. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Caroline's position? Would you have exposed your family publicly, or would you have walked away quietly? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that standing up for truth is always worth it, even when it's hard, please hit that subscribe button. There are so many more stories like this one, stories about people who refused to be broken, who chose integrity over comfort, who fought back against injustice in their own lives. And I want to share every one of them with you. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone who's struggling with their own difficult family situation, someone who feels trapped, someone who needs to know that they're not alone and that choosing themselves isn't selfish. It's survival. Leave a comment telling me what part of Caroline's story hit you the hardest. Was it the wedding confrontation? The moment she found her grandfather's letter? The realization that both sisters were victims in different ways? I want to know what resonated with you. And remember this. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't owe loyalty to people who've never been loyal to you. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of this community where we believe that truth matters, integrity matters, and every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are. I'll see you in the next story.